Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto joined the Straw Hats and fell in love with Yamato? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sun God and the Whirlwind. The end was not an explosion. It was the sound of tearing fabric, a universe-wide rip as reality itself gave way. Naruto Uzumaki, 7th Hokage of Konoha, stood at the epicenter of the wound. His body alight with the golden fire of Six Paths Sage Mode. Before him, the Otsutsuki, a being of sterile white and celestial arrogance, was dissolving, its form unable to withstand the final, desper. 8 Rasengan that held the compressed rage of a world pushed to its brink. But the creature's defeat had come at a cost. Its final act was one of spite, a forbidden technique that targeted the very laws of space-time. Turning its own death into a dimensional bomb. A vortex of impossible colors spiraled into existence, a hungry mouth of non-reality. It did not pull with wind, but with the silent, irresistible gravity of oblivion. Shinobi were being flayed from existence, the very land of their ancestors turning to dust and memory. Sasuke was down, his Rinnegan bleeding light, having already give N everything to get Naruto this one opening. Sakura was frantically trying to hold him together. Kakashi was a distant figure, shouting orders that were swallowed by the void. There was no time, no other way. Naruto's hands, glowing with power, flew through a series of hand seals that no one had ever seen. They were not for combat, but for creation and containment. Fuinjutsu, the art of sealing, was the Uzumaki clan's birthright. And this was its ultimate expression, a jutsu whispered of infaded scrolls, one that required a living sacrifice to power. The Jigen Shiki Fujin, the dimensional right seal. Golden chains of pure chakra erupted from his back, not the aggressive, grasping chains of his mother, but intricate, latticed ribbons of light. They shot into the dimensional tear, weaving a net of impossible complexity. The pull on him was immense, a hook in his very soul. He felt his connection to the world, to the sage's power, to Kurama's lingering chakra, to the very soil of his home, stretching thin. Like a thread about to snap, his gaze flickered across the battlefield. He saw Hinata, her face a mask of horrified understanding. He saw his children, Boruto and Himawari, being shielded by their grandfather. Their small forms trembling. His heart, the heart of a father, a husband, a Hokage, broke. He poured every last drop of his being into the seal. His memories, the taste of Ichiraku ramen, the weight of the Hokage hat, the feeling of his daughter's hand in his, the look in his son's eyes, a mirror of his own youthful defiance. He wove it all into the chains, giving the seal an anchor in what was real. The tearing sound began to subside, the vortex contracting as the golden lattice pulled it shut. He had a single, fleeting moment. He met Hinata's eyes across the chaos. He couldn't speak, but he hoped she could see it all in his expression. I love you. I'm sorry. Live. Then the thread snapped. The world vanished. There was a sensation of being turned inside out, of every atom of his being stretched across an infinite, soundless expanse. He was a thought, a memory, a scream lost in the space between heartbeats. And then, nothing. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a splinter of glass in the mind. Pain was the first anchor. A deep, radiating agony that started in his chest and branched out through every limb. His chakra network, the intricate web of energy that was as much a part of him as his own circulatory system, felt like a scorched and shattered ruin. He tried to draw on it, and act as natural as breathing, and was met with a scream of protest from 1,000 severed pathways. He forced an eye open. The light was wrong. Too bright, too pure. It wasn't the familiar, gentle sun of the land of fire. This was a harsh, unforgiving GLA. That bleached the color from the world. He was lying on his back, half submerged in cool, receding water. The scent of salt, thick and heavy, filled his lungs. He'd never smelled anything like it. It was clean, but wild, ancient. He pushed himself up with a groan, his muscles screaming. His familiar orange and black jacket was shredded, the fabric stiff with dried blood and seawater. He was on a beach of fine, white sand that stretched in either direction, bordered by a dense, impossibly green jungle on one side and an endless, churning expanse of deep blue water on the other. He had seen lakes. He had seen rivers. He had never seen water that met the horizon. He staggered to his feet, his balance precarious. A wave washed over his ankles, and the sheer vastness of it, the raw, untamed power, sent a tremor of awe and terror through him. Where was he? He performed his most basic and instinctual skill, the sensory technique. He reached out with the tattered remnants of his chakra, expecting to feel the familiar life energies of Konoha, the hum of a great civilization. He felt nothing, not an empty wasteland, but a vibrant, teeming world utterly alien to him. The life force of the plants in the jungle was potent, almost aggressive. The animals within were strange, their energies spiky and unfamiliar. And the water was alive in a way he couldn't comprehend, a colossal, sleeping entity whose presence was a low thrum against his senses. He was alone, truly, utterly alone. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, heavier than any tailed beast bomb. The Jigen Shiki Fujin, it had worked. It had sealed the tear. It had saved his world. And it had thrown him away like a stone cast into an infinite ocean. Grief, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of his pain. Hinata, Boruto, Himawari. A choked sob escaped his lips, a raw, wounded sound that was immediately swallowed by the rhythmic crash of the waves. He fell to his knees, his hands digging into the wet sand. They were safe. He had to believe that. He had to cling to that one fact, or this crushing solitude would unmake him. He was the Hokage. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He did not break. He forced himself to stand, his jaw set. He was a shinobi, stranded, injured, alone. The mission was simple: survive, assess, understand, find a way home. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the salty air a strange balm on his raw nerves. He turned his gaze from the mocking, endless ocean and looked toward the jungle. Shelter, water, information. The training of a lifetime kicked in, a familiar current in a sea of unknowns. He took one step, then another, his limp pronounced but his will unbroken, and disappeared into the shade of the towering, unfamiliar trees. On the deck of the Thousand Sunny, a few miles off the coast of that same unnamed island, Nico Robin leaned against the rail, a rubbing from a recently acquired poneglyph spread across a small table. The strange, blocky script told a familiar yet fragmented story of the void century, of a great kingdom, and of the familiar names of the ancient weapons. It was a puzzle she had dedicated her life to, and each new piece was a treasure. But something was wrong. As she traced a line of text detailing the nature of the sun god, a single character on the aged parchment began to emit a soft, ethereal light. It was not one of the ancient glyphs. It was an outsider, a small, complex symbol tucked away in a corner, almost like a forgotten artist's signature. It was a symbol she had never seen before in all her studies. A perfect, nine-pointed swirl, like a tiny galaxy. As the light pulsed, a deep, resonant hum seemed to vibrate through the very wood of the ship, a note of profound cosmic significance that lasted only a moment before fading. Robin stared at the symbol, her blood running cold. Her fingers traced its shape. It felt impossibly old, older than the poneglyph itself. It was a warning, a key, an arrival. The world had just changed, and she was perhaps the only person alive who held a clue as to how. "What you lookin' at, Robin?" Luffy's head stretched over her shoulder, his face a mask of cheerful ignorance. That another one of those secret map thingies." Robin carefully rolled the parchment, her expression unreadable. "Something like that, Captain," she said, her voice a low murmur. "A new piece of the puzzle. There's someone on the island." Chopper's shout from the crow's nest drew the attention of the rest of the crew. They had decided to dock for fresh fruit and water before making the final push to the turbulent waters of Wano. The island had seemed uninhabited, a perfect, quiet respite. "Are they Marines?" Sanji asked, a curl of smoke rising from his cigarette as he leaned against the galley door. "I don't think so," Chopper called down, his hooves gripping his binoculars. "He's just one guy. He's really hurt. He's wearing weird clothes. Bright orange." Luffy's interest was instantly piqued. A weird, injured guy on a deserted island. That was prime adventure material. "Let's go check him out," he declared, already bouncing on the balls of his feet. Hold on, Luffy, Nami snapped, her hand on her hip. We don't know who he is. It could be a trap. Remember what happened at Punk Hazard. Zoro, you come with me, Luffy said, completely ignoring her. If he's an enemy, you can cut him. If he's interesting, I'll talk to him. Zoro, who had been napping against the mast, cracked one eye open. He didn't say anything, but the slight smirk on his face and the way his and rested on the hilt of his swords was answer enough. A small party made their way to shore. Luffy, full of reckless curiosity. Zoro, ready for a fight. Chopper, concerned and carrying his medical bag, and Usopp, who insisted on coming as long-range tactical support, but was currently hiding behind Zoro's leg. They found him passed out at the edge of the jungle, face down in the mulch. He must have succumbed to his injuries shortly after entering the trees. Chopper rushed forward, his medical instincts overriding any fear. His breathing is shallow, and his pulse is all over the place. The little reindeer doctor exclaimed, his tiny hooves pressing against the man's neck. He rolled him over carefully. The man was young, perhaps in his early 20s, with spiky blonde hair caked with dirt and blood. His face was handsome, but etched with exhaustion and pain. The most peculiar features were the 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek, which gave him a somewhat feral look. Whoa, look at his face, Luffy said, squatting down for a closer look and poking one of the whisker marks. Are you a cat man? A fox man? Luffy, stop that, he's injured, Chopper scolded, as he began to gently examine the man's torso. His hands brushed against the tattered fabric. Underneath, he felt not just broken ribs and severe bruising, but something else. A strange network of something. It felt like a second nervous system. But it was frayed and burned out in places, emitting a faint, almost electrical heat. Chopper had never encountered anything like it in any medical textbook. Zoro's eye narrowed. He wasn't a sensor like the strange man he'd met in Dressrosa, but he could feel it. A dormant power radiating from the unconscious form, a pressure in the air. It wasn't hockey, not exactly. It was something else, something wild and ancient. This man was dangerous, or had been. We should bring him back to the ship, Chopper said, his voice firm. I can't treat him here. He has multiple fractures, severe internal bleeding, and something else I don't understand. It's a miracle he's alive at all. Luffy grinned. All right, a new mystery person. I hope he's a musician. With Zoro and a very reluctant Usopp carrying the unconscious stranger, they returned to the Thousand Sunny. Naruto awoke to the gentle rocking of something. He was lying on a soft bed in a small, clean room filled with tea. He scent of antiseptics and unfamiliar herbs. His chest was tightly bound, and the sharpest edges of the pain had been dulled to a persistent, throbbing ache. He tried to sit up, but a small, furry, sea-reacher with a blue nose and a pink hat placed a hoof on his shoulder. Easy there, you shouldn't move, the creature said in a high-pitched, squeaky voice. Naruto stared. He had seen summoning animals. He had fought alongside giant toads. But he had never seen a talking reindeer fawn dressed as a doctor. He blinked, wondering if this was some kind of hallucination brought on by his injuries. The creature's words were gibberish, an unfamiliar language. He opened his mouth, his throat dry. Doko. Da. Where am I? The reindeer tilted its head, its expression one of confusion. It let out a series of squeaks and chirps in its own language. This was going nowhere. Naruto let his head fall back onto the pillow, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He was weak, weaker than he'd been since he was a child. He tried to gather a sliver of chakra to his hand, just to prove to himself that he could, but the attempt sent a fresh spike of agony through his torso. The door opened, and a tall, elegant woman with black hair entered. She was followed by the boy in the straw hat he had seen in his fleeting moments of consciousness on the beach. The woman, Robin, regarded him with calm, intelligent eyes. She listened to the reindeer, Chopper, speak, then turned her gaze to Naruto. She said something in her own tongue, her voice calm and melodic. Naruto just shook his head, gesturing to his ears. Wakaranai, I don't understand. Robin paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. Then, a small smile touched her lips. She brought her hands together in front of her. Fuller. To Naruto's utter shock, A series of arms sprouted from the floor and walls around him. They weren't hostile, just there. Two of the arms offered him a glass of water. Another adjusted his pillow. It was a jutsu, a kekai genkei. He had never seen anything like it. He took the water, his eyes never leaving her. She was a user, then a fighter. Robin spoke again, this time slowly, pointing to herself. Robin. Then she pointed to the boy in the straw hat. Luffy. And to the reindeer. Chopper. Naruto understood. Introductions. He pointed to himself, his voice raspy. Naruto. Luffy's face split into a wide, impossibly large grin. Naruto, he said, enunciating the name perfectly. Nice to meet ya. Are you strong? The words were still meaningless, but the tone was universal. It was the same question Kiba Choji would have asked. It was a challenger's greeting. Despite the pain, despite the despair, a flicker of something familiar warmed him. Robin continued her strange, one-sided lesson. For the next hour, she used her abilities and a picture book she retrieved from a shelf to bridge the gap. She would show him a picture of an apple, say the word, and then have an arm hand him one. Through T.'s bizarre but surprisingly effective method, a rudimentary understanding began to form. Ship, pirate, doctor, friend. He learned they were the Straw Hat Pirates. He, a former head of state, a world leader, had been rescued by wanted criminals. The irony was so thick he could have choked on it. But as he watched them, he saw none of the malice or greed he would have associated with the term. Luffy was an idiot, but his energy was boundless and infectious. Chopper was kind and dedicated. Robin was preternaturally calm and intelligent. When Sanji entered with a tray of food, a fragrant seafood stew that made Naruto's stomach rumble loud enough for everyone to hear, he was greeted with a level of reverence for the chef that was almost religious. The food was incredible, the best thing he ever tasted that hadn't come from a ramen stand. He communicated through gestures and the few words Robin had taught him. He was a traveler. From very far away, he was in a battle. He was lost. He kept the details to himself. The truth was too fantastical, too painful to share. Luffy, sitting cross-legged on the floor, watched him eat with an intense focus. When Naruto was done, the Straw Hat Captain looked him dead in the eye. Naruto, he said, his expression suddenly serious. Why were you fighting? Robin translated, using a combination of their new shared words and gestures. Fight. Why? Naruto looked down at his empty bowl. He thought of the village, of his family, of the countless lives that had been hanging in the balance. He met Luffy's gaze, and for the first time, he let a sliver of his true self show. He didn't need words. The conviction in his eyes, the deep, unshakable certainty of a man who had protected others his entire life, was its own language. Luffy's grin returned, wider than ever. He understood. That was all the answer he needed. A few days later, Naruto was well enough to walk the deck, his body still a canvas of aches but his shinobi resilience forcing a rapid recovery. The Straw Hats, he had decided, were a force of nature. A whirlwind of chaos, loyalty, and laughter. Nami managed the ship's finances and navigation with an iron fist. Usopp told wild, unbelievable stories to anyone who would listen. Frankie, a giant man who was apparently made of metal, was constantly upgrading the ship with beams of light and strange contraptions. Brook, a living skeleton, played the violin and asked to see women's panties. And Zoro seemed to do nothing but sleep, train with weights that looked like they could anchor a battleship, and get lost walking in a straight line. They were insane. They were a family. It made his heart ache with a homesickness so profound it was a physical pain. They had docked at the small island village they'd been heading for. It was a peaceful port town. The people friendly and welcoming. Nami, Sanji, and Chopper went for supplies. Frankie was looking for quality wood. Robin and Brook went to find a library or any ancient stones. Luffy, Usopp, and Zoro stayed on the ship with Naruto, who was under strict doctor's orders not to overexert himself. The peace was shattered by screams. From the deck, they could see a crowd of villagers running from the town square. They were being chased by a group of large, brutish men, all bearing the same tattoo, a skull with a pair of horns. Beast pirates. What's going on? Usopp yelped, peering through his goggles. Looks like some jerks are picking on the locals, Zoro grunted, his hand already on his swords. A particularly large man stood in the center of the square, laughing. He was grossly overweight, with a jaw that seemed to unhinge like a snake's. He had the lower body of a hippopotamus, a grotesque fusion that marked him as a smile user. This was Guzzler Guro, a headliner of the beast pirates who enjoyed terrorizing small, undefended islands for tribute. "Bring me all your food and all your sake, or I'll eat your houses next," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the square. He punctuated his threat by grabbing a market stall and stuffing the entire thing, wood, canvas, and fruit, into his gaping maw, crunching it down with a sickening splintering sound. Naruto's eyes hardened. He had seen this 1,000 times. The strong preying on the weak. Bullies who used their power to inspire fear. It was the one thing he would not, tolerate. "I'm going," he said, his voice low and firm. His grasp of their language was still clumsy, but his intent was crystal clear. "Hey, you're supposed to be resting," Luffy said, though he was already standing, his fists clenched. Naruto just gave him a look. It was a look that said, "Try and stop me." He vaulted over the ship's railing, landing lightly on the grassy bank despite the protest from his ribs. He moved with a quiet purpose. Not a mad dash like Luffy would have, but a swift, ground-eating stride that carried him toward the village square. Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp were right behind him. When Naruto arrived, Guro had a terrified child held by the scruff of his neck, lifting him off the ground. The boy's mother was on her knees, begging. "Please, sir, he's just a boy, he's noisy," Guro grunted, opening his hippo mouth wide. He never got the chance. A blur of orange and black shot past him. There was a sharp crack, and the child was suddenly gone from his grasp, appearing safely in the arms of his mother 20 feet away. Naruto stood between them and the pirates, his back to the villagers he was now protecting. Guro blinked, confused. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto didn't answer. He just stood there, his blue eyes cold as ice. The message was clear. "This is over. Get him." Guro roared at his men. About 20 pirates charged, brandishing swords and clubs. Naruto moved. It wasn't a flashy display. It was the brutal, efficient economy of motion of a master martial artist. He flowed through them like water. A palm heel strike to a man's chin, dislocating his jaw. A sweep of his leg that took 3 men out at the knees. He used an opponent's sword arm to block another's attack, then snapped the limb with a sharp twist. He was a whirlwind of precise, debilitating strikes. The Straw Hats watched, momentarily stunned. Luffy's eyes were wide with excitement. Zoro's smirk was one of pure, professional respect. "He's good," the swordsman noted. Within 30 seconds, all of Goro's men were on the ground, groaning and clutching broken bones. None were dead, but none would be getting up anytime soon. Naruto stood in the center of the carnage, breathing a little heavily. The exertion was taking its toll. His vision swam for a second. Guro stared, his arrogance replaced by a flicker of rage and disbelief. You bastard. I'm a headliner of the beast pirates. I have a devil fruit. I don't care," Naruto said, the foreign words coming out with a guttural finality. Enraged, Guro charged. He was surprisingly fast for his size, his massive hippo legs thundering across the square. He threw a punch, his fist coated in a faint, shimmering layer of black. Basic armament hockey. Naruto's senses, honed by countless battles and amplified by his sage training, screamed a warning. He tried to dodge, but his injured body was a fraction too slow. The blow caught him on the side, sending him skidding back 10 feet, a fresh explosion of pain erupting in his ribs. He coughed, tasting blood. "See," Guro laughed, pounding his chest. "You're nothing." Naruto pushed himself upright, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Okay, so taijutsu wasn't enough. He needed to end this. Now, he held up his right hand. He didn't have the reserves for a massive one, or the control for a Rasenshuriken. But he had enough for the original. He focused, gathering the scattered, rebellious dregs of his chakra, forcing them to obey. A swirl of blue energy, crackling and unstable, began to form in his palm. It was small, barely the size of his fist, and it sputtered erratically. It was a pale imitation of his usual power. But it would be enough. Guro saw the spinning ball of light and hesitated, a primal instinct warning him that it was dangerous. But his pride won out. Some kind of light show. I'll eat it. He charged again. Naruto met him head-on. He ducked under a wild swing, his body screaming in protest, and shoved his hand forward, pressing the small, sputtering sphere into Goro's soft belly. Rasengan. There was no grand explosion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Goro's eyes went wide. A grinding, tearing sound came from within him. The force of the Rasengan wasn't explosive, it was rotational. A miniature typhoon of pure power that drilled into him, shredding muscle, pulverizing organs, and rupturing his insides in a vortex of unstoppable force. Goro was launched backward as if hit by a cannonball. He slammed into the side of a building, his eyes rolled back in his head, and slid to the ground in an unconscious, broken heap. The hippo legs twitched once, then were still. Silence descended on the square. The villagers stared in awe. The remaining Straw Hats looked on, their jaws slack. Luffy had seen a lot of powerful attacks. But he'd never seen anything like that. It was so small, yet so absolute. Naruto stood over his defeated opponent, his chest heaving. The last of his accessible chakra was gone. The world began to tilt, black spots dancing in his vision. He swayed on his feet, his knees buckling. Before he could fall, a strong hand gripped his shoulder. He looked up into the intense, single eye of the green-haired swordsman, Zoro. "You overdid it, idiot," Zoro said. But there was no heat in his words. Only a grudging respect. Luffy came bouncing over, his grin stretching from ear to ear. "That was so cool. What was that spinny thing? Can you do it again? Can you teach me?" Naruto just managed a weak, tired smile before his legs finally gave out. Zoro caught him easily, slinging his arm over his shoulder. That evening, the village threw a feast for their saviors. The Straw Hats were celebrated with food, drink, and music. Naruto, patched up again by a fussy but secretly impressed Chopper, sat by the fire, nursing a cup of water. He watched as Luffy devoured half a roasted boar, as Sanji flirted shamelessly with the village women, as Usopp regaled children with a highly exaggerated version of Naruto's fight. He felt a pang of longing for his own team, for the boisterous celebrations after a successful mission. But as he watched this new, strange group of people who had taken him in without question, who fought for the innocent just as he did, a different feeling began to take root. Not belonging, not yet, but the possibility of it. Nami sat down beside him, handing him a plate of food. "You were incredible today, Naruto." "Thank you." "They were weak," Naruto said, his gaze distant. "Protecting them is normal." Nami studied his face, the strange marks on his cheeks, the deep sadness that seemed to linger in his eyes even when he smiled. "You're not from around here, are you? Not just from a different island. From somewhere else entirely." Naruto didn't confirm or deny it. He just looked out at the endless, dark ocean. "My home is very far away. I don't know if I can get back." Luffy, his mouth full, waddled over and plopped down on his other side. He swallowed a huge mouthful of meat and looked at Naruto, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "You can come with us," he said simply. Naruto turned to look at him. "We're pirates," Luffy continued, picking his teeth with a bone. "We do what we want. We're going to a really crazy place next. It'll be dangerous, but we're all strong, and you're strong, so you should come with us. Until you find your way home." It wasn't a plea, it was a statement of fact. An invitation into their chaos. Naruto looked at the faces around the fire. He saw the easy camaraderie, the fierce loyalty. He saw a captain whose simple philosophy of freedom and friendship resonated with the deepest parts of his own soul. He had no map, no allies, no knowledge of this vast, alien world. Staying here, alone, was a slow death. Moving forward with them, that was a chance. A flicker of hope. "Where?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet. "Where are you going?" Nami unrolled a map, her finger tracing a path across a series of islands, leading to one shrouded in swirling, violent currents. The drawing of the island was stark. A snow-capped mountain shaped like a skull, and rivers that flowed uphill into a misty interior. "Wano country," she said, her voice grim. "We're goin' to help our friend free it from a tyrant. An emperor of the sea named Kaido." Naruto looked at the map, then at Luffy's determined face. A land ruled by a tyrant. A friend in need of saving. A battle against impossible odds. For the first time since he had arrived in this strange new world, Naruto Uzumaki felt a genuine smile spread across his face. It was tired, tinged with sadness, but it was real. This, at least, was a language he understood perfectly. "All right," he said, giving a single, decisive nod. "I'll go with you." Luffy let out a whoop of joy, throwing his arms in the air. The adventure had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Ghost of Curry. The ascent was a nightmare symphony of roaring water and screaming wood. The Thousand Sunny, a ship built for adventure and joy, was caught in a force of nature that defied all logic. Giant carp, impossibly large, were dragging them up a colossal waterfall that fell from the sky-high cliffs of Wano. The water around them wasn't blue. It was a sickly, polluted gray, churning with a fury that threatened to tear the ship apart. "Everyone, hold on to something," Nami shrieked, her hands white-knuckled on the ship's helm as she tried to navigate the insane vertical river. "This is amazing," Luffy yelled, his laughter echoing against the roar of the falls, his body stretched like rubber as he anchored himself to the mast and the railing simultaneously. Naruto, standing near the bow, had never felt anything like it. The sheer, raw power of the water was exhilarating, terrifying. His sensory abilities were on fire, overwhelmed by the chaotic energy of this country. It felt sick. The land itself felt poisoned, its life force groaning under a heavy, oppressive weight. But beneath that sickness, there were pockets of incredible strength, flames of defiance that burned like hidden bonfires. And then, at the crest of the waterfall, came the whirlpool. It appeared without warning, a swirling maw in the basin atop the falls. The carp, their job done, released the ship, and the Sunny was immediately caught in the vortex's grip. "We're going in," Frankie yelled over the din. "It's going to swallow us whole," Usopp wailed, his face pale. Naruto acted on instinct. He braced himself against the foredeck, hands slamming onto the wood. "Zoro, on my left. Sanji, right, we need to stabilize it." High's command of their language was still rough, but the urgency was universal. Zoro, grinning with the thrill of it, and Sanji, abandoning his own efforts to secure the galley, immediately understood. They flanked him, putting their shoulders to the railing. It was a futile gesture against the might of the whirlpool, but it was the instinct of warriors facing a common foe. The ship tilted, groaning in protest. Water crashed over the deck, sweeping away crates and barrels. Chopper was nearly washed overboard before Robin's sprouted arms caught him, pulling him to safety. The world became a spinning, churning chaos of water and sky. Naruto felt a sickening lurch as the Sunny was pulled under, the pressure building, the light dimming. He held his breath, his mind racing. He could use a shadow clone. Maybe try to push them out with a Rasengan. No, he was still too weak. The backlash would be immense. He was just a passenger in the chaos. The ship was spat out moments later, tossed like a child's toy into a calmer, but no less menacing, stretch of water. They had breached Wano's defenses. But the cost was separation. Luffy's rubber body had been flung like a slingshot toward a distant beach. The whirlpool had torn the ship itself asunder, sending the main vessel careening in one direction while the section holding Nami, Sanji, Chopper, and Brook was ripped away toward another. Naruto managed to cling to the main wreckage of the Sunny, along with Zoro, Robin, Frankie, and Usopp. They eventually washed ashore on a desolate beach littered with the skeletons of ships and sea creatures, under a sky the color of ash. They were alive, they were in Wano, and they were scattered to the winds. Naruto coughed up a lungful of foul-tasting water, pushing himself to his feet on the black sand. His gaze swept the grim landscape. Broken-down villages, smokestacks pumping black bile into the air, and the oppressive feeling of despair. It reminded him of the darker days in the land of rain under Pain's rule. "Luffy!" Usopp shouted, his voice cracking. "Nami, Sanji." There was no reply but the whistling of the wind through the shipwrecks. "They can't be far," Frankie said, his voice grim, as he assessed the damage to what was left of the Sunny. "This is a super bad situation, but the crew is tough." Zoro was already looking toward the blighted interior of the island. "We find them. And we find this Kinemon person." Naruto closed his eyes, shutting out the visual chaos and focusing inward. He extended his senses, pushing past the pain in his still healing chakra network. He cast a wide, desperate net. He felt the familiar, warm presences of the crewmates on the beach with him. He searched further. He could feel the distant, bright, joyous flame that was Luffy, far to the west. He could feel the cluster of energies that were the others, to the north. They were alive. That was all that mattered. But as he broadened his search, his senses snagged on something else. Something powerful. It was a maelstrom of violent, bestial energy, roaring and thrashing against unseen chains. It felt raw, powerful, and deeply angry. But at its core, beneath the rage, was something else. A profound, aching loneliness. A familiar cry for freedom. It reminded him, with a startling pang of nostalgia, of Kurama in the early days, the caged beast, the prisoner of power, radiating a fury born of confinement. This energy was located southeast of them, deep in a region the map on the sunny had labeled, Kuri. This energy was a beacon in the oppressive gloom of Wano. It was a kindred spirit, whether it knew it or not. I feel something, Naruto said, his voice low. Everyone turned to him. Something, strong, and angry. Over there. He pointed southeast. I don't know what it is, but it's not like the others. It feels caged. Zoro's eye narrowed. A strong fighter. More than that, Naruto replied, his gaze distant. A prisoner. Robin watched him, her curiosity piqued. His sensory abilities were unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't observation hockey. It was more like he could feel the very soul of a person. Our best bet is to gather information, Robin stated logically. Kuri is an old territory of the Kazuki clan. If we're going to understand the situation, it's as good a place as any to start. Agreed, Zoro grunted. Let's move. Naruto felt a pull toward that caged energy. A compulsion he couldn't explain. It was a problem, and his entire life had been about running toward problems, not away from them. Without another word, he started walking, his path aimed directly at the source of the roaring power. The others followed, a small band of invaders in a land that ate hope for breakfast. The ruins of Kuri were a testament to a broken dream. Once domain of the vibrant and beloved Kazuki Oden, it was now a shadow of its former self. Dilapidated buildings leaned against each other like weary old men, and the very ground seemed to cry out in misery. It was here, in the shadow of what was once Oden Castle, that Naruto's senses flared with proximity. The caged energy was close. And it was in combat. He broke into a run, outpacing the others. His shinobi training making him a silent blur across the rooftops of a ruined town. He crested a hill and looked down into a small, open clearing. The scene was one of brutal, one-sided destruction. A dozen or so beast pirates, all bearing the horned skull tattoo, were scattered across the ground, either unconscious or groaning in pain. In the center of them stood a figure of incredible presence. They were tall, powerfully built, with long, flowing white hair that braided into shades of green and blue at the ends. A pair of prominent red horns jutted from their head. They wore a flowing white robe over a red top, bound by a massive purple and white Neo-Dasuki sash. In their hands, they wielded a colossal spiked kanabo, a club that looked like it could shatter mountains. On their face were fierce red markings, and their eyes, a striking mix of orange and gold, burned with righteous fury. Most bizarrely, a mask, one from traditional Wano theater with a fierce, snarling expression, covered their upper face. Foul lackeys of Kaido. The figure boomed, their voice powerful and resonant, though clearly belonging to a woman trying to sound like a man. You defile the land of Kuri with your presence. I will not allow it. For I am Kazuki Oden. The remaining pirates, terrified but bound by their fear of Kaido, charged her. The self-proclaimed Oden met them with a roar. She moved with a speed that defied her size. Her kanabo a blur of motion. She wasn't just swinging it, she was wielding it with surprising grace. A pirate lunged with a sword. She sidestepped and brought the club down in a devastating arc. The shockwave alone sending the man flying. Another tried to attack from behind. Without looking, she swung the kanabo backward, catching him square in the chest with a sickening crunch. It was a display of overwhelming, raw power. But as Naruto watched from the shadows, he saw more than that. He saw the desperation in her movements. The way she put every ounce of her being into every swing. as if trying to shatter not just the pirates, but the very air around her. It was the fighting style of someone trying to break out of a cage. One of the pirates, a larger man with mantis-like arms, managed to land a glancing blow on her arm, drawing blood. "You're not Odin. You're just Kaido's freak son," he snarled. The comment hit a nerve. The woman's aura flared violently. "Silence," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure rage. With a single, earth-shattering blow, she brought her club down, pulverizing the ground where the pirate stood. "I am Odin." As the dust settled, she stood panting, her shoulders heaving, her gaze swept the clearing, searching for any remaining threats. Her eyes, burning with that wild, caged fire, locked onto Naruto's position on the hill. He had been so focused on her energy that he had let his own guard down, his own powerful signature leaking out. She saw him not as a spectator, but as the next threat. "You," she bellowed, pointing her kanabo at him. "Another of Kaido's assassins. You hide in the shadows like a coward. Face me." Naruto didn't move, he simply met her gaze. He could feel the turmoil within her, the righteous anger warring with a deep-seated pain. He stepped out from the treeline, his hands held open at his sides in a non-threatening gesture. That was the wrong move. To her, it was a sign of arrogance. "You mock me." With a roar, she leapt, covering the distance between them in a single, impossible bound. Her kanabo, glowing with a faint, powerful aura, Conqueror's Haki, though Naruto didn't know the name for it, came crashing down on him. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even form a hand sign. At the last possible second, he moved. He sidestepped, the massive club slamming into the ground where he'd been standing, shattering rock and sending tremors through the earth. The sheer force of the wind from the blow whipped his jacket around him. He was fast, faster than she had anticipated. "I am not your enemy," Naruto said, his voice calm and even. "Words are wind," she retorted, spinning on her heel, the kanabo coming around in a sweeping horizontal arc aimed at his waist. "Only actions have meaning." Naruto bent backward, the club whistling inches over his chest. As it passed, he pushed off the ground, flipping backward to land silently a dozen feet away. He was analyzing her, his shinobi mind breaking down her movements. Immense strength, brawler's instincts, but a slight overcommitment on her big swings. She was fighting with her heart, not her head. "You fight to prove who you are," Naruto observed, his voice cutting through her rage. His insight only enraged her further. "I know who I am," she screamed, and came at him again, a flurry of devastating blows. This time, Naruto didn't just dodge. He engaged. He flowed around her attacks, his movements fluid and precise. When the kanabo came down, he didn't try to block it, but would slap his palm against the side of the club, redirecting its momentum just enough to make it miss. He used her own force against her, turning her into a storm he was calmly navigating. He was a leaf in the wind, untouchable. Their battle was a dance of opposites. Her wild, powerful explosions of force against his controlled, economical grace. She was a hurricane, he was the calm eye of the storm. Frustrated, she roared, and a blast of pure will, of Conqueror's Haki, washed over him. It was a wave of spiritual pressure meant to crush the weak-willed into submission. The surviving beast pirates, already injured, foamed at the mouth and passed out. Naruto staggered back a step, a sharp pain lancing through his skull. It felt like someone was trying to physically squeeze his soul. He had felt pressure like this before, from the likes of Madara or Kagaya. He gritted his teeth, his own immense willpower, forged in a lifetime of defying fate, pushing back against the invisible force. The pressure receded, unable to find purchase. He was still standing. He was completely unaffected. The woman's eyes widened in shock behind her mask. No one, save her father, had ever stood up to her Conqueror's Haki so easily. Who was this man? "Enough," Naruto said, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that resonated deeper than her shout. He moved. In the split second she was stunned, he closed the distance. He didn't attack her. He ran straight up the length of her kanabo as she held it, his chakra-infused feet sticking to the wood. Before she could react, he was in front of her, his hand reaching out. Not for her throat, but for the mask on her face. She jerked back, but his fingers were faster. He hooked them under the edge of the mask and gently lifted it away. The face beneath was not the weathered, determined face of Kazuki Oden. It was the face of a young, beautiful woman, her features a mix of fierce determination and a startling, profound vulnerability. Her orange-gold eyes, now unobscured, were wide with shock and a hint of fear. Naruto held the mask in his hand, his gaze soft. He wasn't looking at a monster or a god or a legendary samurai. He was looking at a person. "See," he said softly, "this isn't you." They stood there for a long moment, chest to chest, the sounds of their breathing the only noise in the clearing. The fight was over. It had ended not with a final blow, but with a simple, disarming act of understanding. From the hill, Zoro let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned." A tense silence hung between them. The woman, she had not yet offered a name, snatched the mask back from his hand. But she didn't put it back on. She held it at her side like a shield, her knuckles white. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice losing its forced masculine tone, revealing its natural, clearer pitch. "Why are you in Wano?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. My friends and I were shipwrecked. We're looking for them." He kept his answers simple, truthful. "I felt your energy." It was loud. She flinched at that, as if he had pointed out a physical flaw. "So you came to gawk at Kaido's monstrous son." The word, son, was spat with self-loathing. "I came because I heard a prisoner shouting," Naruto corrected her gently. "I know that sound." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. She studied him, this strange man in orange and black. He didn't look at her with fear or disgust, as the beast pirates did. He didn't look at her with awe, as the few remaining Kazuki loyalists might. He looked at her with a quiet, unnerving empathy. "I am not a prisoner," she declared, her voice regaining its bluster. "I carry the will of Kazuki Oden. I will liberate this country and open its borders, just as he intended. It is my destiny." She held up a book that had been tucked into her sash. It was worn, the cover soft with age. "It is all written here." In his logbook, Naruto listened patiently, letting her speak. He recognized the fervor of someone who had clung to a single idea as a lifeline. He had been the same with his dream of becoming Hokage. "Oden was a great man," she continued, her voice filled with passion. "He was strong, and free. He sailed the seas with the Pirate King. He saw the dawn of the world. To be like him is the greatest honor imaginable." Naruto nodded slowly when she was finished, his expression thoughtful. He looked at her, then at the desolate land around them. At the chains still visible on her wrists. "That was his dream," Naruto said, his voice soft but clear as a bell. "He achieved it. He lived it. But what about you?" She stared at him, utterly bewildered. "What?" "That was Kazuki Oden's dream," Naruto repeated, his gaze unwavering. "What's yours?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "Yamato," for that was her name. A name she had tried to bury, felt the words strike her like a physical blow. Her mind went blank. My dream. Her entire existence, her entire identity for the past 20 years, had been a furious, desperate effort to become Oden. It was her rebellion, her shield, her purpose. The concept of a dream separate from that, a dream that was hers and hers alone, was so alien it was paralyzing. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever thought to look past the Oden persona and see the person suffocating underneath. My dream is to be Oden," she stammered, the words sounding weak and hollow even to her own ears. "Is it?" Naruto asked, his voice gentle, not accusatory. "Or is that the only dream you were allowed to have?" His words cut straight to the core of her, bypassing 2 decades of self-imposed identity. She thought of her father, Kaido, who had beaten her, imprisoned her, and tried to break her will. She had chosen Oden because he was the antithesis of her father. He was freedom. He was honor. But had she chosen him, or had she simply grabbed the nearest, brightest symbol of defiance? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, much to her fury. She would not cry in front of this stranger. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You know nothing about me. I know what it feels like to have a monster inside you," Naruto said quietly. She froze, turning back to him. "What? To have a power so great that people don't see you anymore," he continued, his gaze becoming distant as he looked at his own hands. "They only see the power. They fear it. They want to use it. Or they want to lock it away. It gets lonely, doesn't it? Being a vessel. Yamato stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. He was talking about her Oni blood, the source of her immense strength. The reason her father called her a tool. He was talking about the fear in the eyes of the people she tried to save, who saw Kaido's horns and flinched. He was describing the core truth of her entire, miserable life. How? She whispered. I had a partner like that for a long time, Naruto said, a sad smile touching his lips. A big, angry fox who was sealed inside me when I was born. Everyone in my village saw me as a demon. A monster to be shunned. He looked her directly in the eyes. But we learned to work together. We became friends. And we showed them they were wrong. The power wasn't a curse. It was just a part of me. The confession, so simple and yet so profound, shattered the last of her defenses. He understood. This man, this complete stranger from beyond the sea, understood. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for 20 years receded, just for a moment, in the face of his quiet empathy. My father, he calls me a monster, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He put these on me when I was a child. She held up her wrists, showing the thick metal cuffs. They'll explode if I ever leave Onigashima. Naruto's eyes hardened, a flicker of his own inner fire showing through. The gentle man was gone, replaced for a second by the Hokage, the leader who had seen the worst of humanity. A father doesn't do that to his child. His simple, absolute statement of fact was a validation she had never known. Far away, in the Udon region, the mood was one of absolute despair. The prisoner mines were a living hell, a place where Kaido sent those whose wills he wished to break. Samurai, pirates, and political dissidents were forced into back-breaking labor, given barely enough food and poisoned water to survive. Among them was the stoic figure of Hyogoro the Flower, a once great Yakuza boss reduced to a shriveled old man. Yet, even in this pit, his spirit remained unbroken, his mastery of Haki a quiet flame in the dark. Guarding the prisoners from the shadows was Kawamatsu the Kappa, one of Odin's 9 red scabbards, waiting for the prophesied time. The arrival was silent, unnoticed. It did not walk. It materialized. In a dark corner of the quarry, particles of light and shadow coalesced into a humanoid form. It was slender, sexless, and disturbingly perfect. Its body was like smooth, white porcelain, with lines of gold filigree running across its limbs like circuits. It had no face, just a smooth, reflective surface. It was a herald, a scout construct created by Kagutsuchi Otsutsuki. Its purpose? To gather data on the dominant energy forms of this, diseased, world. It moved with a liquid grace that was utterly inhuman, its feet making no sound on the gravel. The guards didn't see it. The prisoners, lost in their misery, didn't feel it. But Kawamatsu, his senses honed, felt a sudden, unnatural chill. His head snapped up, his gaze scanning the quarry. The herald stopped, its faceless head tilting as it observed Hyogoro. The old man was instructing a new prisoner, Luffy, though the herald didn't know his name, on the finer points of Haki, explaining how to make it flow from the body. The herald's internal sensors analyzed the vibrant, powerful energy. Haki, a localized manifestation of planetary life force. Primitive, yet potent, designated as a primary threat. Its mission parameters were clear. Capture a high-level user for live analysis. The herald moved. It didn't run. Space seemed to fold around it. In one instant, it was across the quarry. In the next, it was standing directly behind Hyogoro, its porcelain hand reaching for the old man's head. Look out, old man, Luffy yelled, having sensed the sudden spike of danger. Kawamatsu exploded from the shadows. Sumo slap. River of tears. He roared, his webbed hands coming down with the force of a tidal wave. The herald didn't dodge. It simply raised a hand. A small, black distortion, a hole in reality no bigger than a coin, appeared in front of its palm. Kawamatsu's powerful, Haki-infused strike hit the distortion and vanished, the force shunted into a pocket dimension. There was no impact, no sound. Kawamatsu's eyes widened in disbelief. His attack had been erased. The herald's other hand continued its path toward Hyogoro. But before it could make contact, a new figure slammed into its side. It was a perfect copy of the blonde-haired man the herald's master was hunting. wreathed in a faint golden energy. A shadow clone. Naruto had felt the alien spike of energy all the way from Curry and had dispatched a clone at near impossible speed to investigate. The clone's punch, a normal hockey-less strike, passed harmlessly through the herald's torso as it became momentarily intangible. Jutsu. Chakra-based lifeform replication, the herald analyzed internally. Target's signature confirmed. From the other side, Robin, who had been traveling with the separated group and had found her way to Udon, acted instantly. Cyan Fleur. Spider net. 100 arms S. Crowded from the ground and the quarry walls, weaving into a thick, powerful net that enveloped the herald, binding its limbs. The Naruto clone didn't waste the opportunity. It formed a Rasengan in its palm, small and quick, and plunged it into the center of the herald's chest, where the golden filigree converged. This time, the herald couldn't phase through the combined physical and spiritual pressure. There was a high-pitched shriek, like grinding metal and static. The porcelain body cracked, golden light pouring from the fissures. For a single moment, its faceless head turned toward the clone, and a single complex symbol, the 9-pointed swirl, flashed on its reflective surface. A final data packet was transmitted across dimensions. Then, the herald dissolved into motes of light, leaving behind only a lingering scent of ozone and the deep, unsettling feeling of having touched something utterly alien. The Naruto clone, its duty done and its chakra expended, dispelled in a puff of smoke. Kawamatsu and a newly arrived Raizo stared at the spot where the being had been. Robin looked at her hands, a deep sense of dread filling her. The symbol that had flashed, it was the same one from the poneglyph rubbing. The hunt had arrived in Wano. Back in the ruins of Curry, the shared confession had created a fragile, tentative bond between Naruto and Yamato. The anger had drained out of her, leaving behind a weary, vulnerable young woman. So, she said, her voice quiet, "You're an outsider, truly, not just from another sea." "I think so," Naruto admitted. "My world is different. We don't have these devil fruits. We have chakra, jutsu. And you're strong," she stated, looking at him with new eyes. "You stopped my Thunder Bagua without even trying to hit back. And you were unaffected by my haki. I'm not at my best," Naruto confessed, a grimace touching his lips as his ribs twinged. "The way I got here, it cost me a lot. But I will be." It was a promise to himself more than to her. A thought occurred to her, and a spark of excitement returned to her eyes. "Wait, my logbook. Odin wrote about a great war, ages ago, that would determine the fate of the world. He said that he wants to lead the world to its dawn would arrive in Wano 20 years from his time. That's now. You must be one of them." Naruto sighed. Prophecies. He was so tired of prophecies. "I'm not here to lead any wars. I'm just trying to find my friends and figure out what to do next." "But this is the same thing," she insisted. "Your friends are here to fight Kaido. My friends are here to fight Kaido. We have the same goal. We must work together." He saw the logic in it. He needed allies in this country, people who knew the lay of the land. And despite her bluster, she was clearly a powerful fighter who hated Kaido with every fiber of her being. She was a valuable asset. More than that, he felt a strange sense of responsibility for her. He had seen the person behind the mask. He couldn't just walk away. "All right," Naruto agreed. "A pact. I'll help you free Wano. And you help me find my friends." A brilliant, genuine smile broke across Yamato's face. It was a stunning transformation, chasing away the shadows and revealing a radiant, infectious joy. It was the first time she had smiled as herself in a very, very long time. "It's a promise. This is so exciting. It's just like when Odin met Whitebeard." Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. "One step at a time. First, we should probably get out of the open." She nodded eagerly, her good mood infectious. "I know a place. A cave behind a waterfall. It's where I hide to read Odin's logbook. It's safe." As she led the way, chattering excitedly about Odin's adventures, Naruto fell into step beside her. He looked at her, the powerful warrior, the lonely prisoner, the excitable young woman, all wrapped into one. He had come to this world broken and alone, grieving a home he might never see again. But here, in this poisoned land, standing next to this self-proclaimed ghost, he felt the first faint stirring of a new purpose. They stopped on a high cliff overlooking the blighted plains of Kuri. The smokestacks of the factories polluted the horizon. The land was scarred and broken. It was a daunting, almost impossible sight. Yamato's cheerful expression faded, replaced by a grim determination. It's so much worse than it was. Odin would weep to see it. Then we'll have to fix it, Naruto said simply, his gaze fixed on the horizon. She turned to him, a question in her eyes. Do you really think we can? My father, Kaido, he's a god. An indestructible monster. Naruto thought of the monsters he had faced. Tailed beasts, Akatsuki, Madara Uchiha, Kagaya Otsutsuki, gods who bled. He looked at the chains on her wrists, at the pain in her eyes, and at the unyielding hope that still burned within her. I've fought gods before, he said, his voice quiet but filled with an absolute, unshakable conviction. They can all be brought down to earth. Yamato stared at him, at the quiet strength radiating from him, at the sadness and power that warred in his blue eyes. In that moment, she didn't see a shipwrecked stranger. She saw an ally, a force of nature to match her own. A promise of a storm that could, finally, cleanse the land of Wano. A shinobi and a self-proclaimed samurai, united by a shared goal, standing on the edge of a war that would shake the world. The dawn Odin had spoken of still felt impossibly far away, but for the first time, Yamato felt she wouldn't have to wait for it alone. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A sage's roar, a god's laughter. Onigashima was not an island. It was a monument to belligerent ego, a skull-shaped fortress that roared with the noise of 10,000 drunken beasts. The air thrummed with war drums, battle cries, and the discordant clang of steel on steel. The allied fleet of samurai, minks, and pirates crashed against its shores like a righteous tide, and the chaos of the raid began. At the heart of the strategic command, huddled on the deck of Trafalgar Law's submarine, a strange calm prevailed. Kinemon, his face grim, pointed at a hastily drawn map of the fortress interior. Kaido is here, in the main keep. Feasting. Our primary objective is to strike the head of the snake. Law nodded, his long sword resting on his shoulder. My crew will handle sabotage at the eastern port. The samurai will push through the main gate. Straw Hat Ya will do whatever he wants, but it will probably be loud and aimed at Kaido. All eyes then turned to the newcomer, the blonde man whose IET intensity seemed to bend the air around him. Naruto Uzumaki knelt beside the map, his expression focused. He had been a whirlwind of activity since their arrival, not of combat, but of intelligence. This fortress is too big, Naruto stated, his finger tracing the sprawling complex. A frontal assault is a meat grinder. You'll lose too many men before you even reach the commanders. It is the samurai way, one of the retainers declared hotly. The samurai way will get you killed, Naruto countered, his voice flat, devoid of disrespect but full of unarguable fact. He met the man's gaze, the samurai found himself unable to hold it. Naruto's blue eyes held the weight of 100,000 similar decisions, of a leader who had sent men to their deaths and knew the cost of every single one. There's a better way. He pressed his hands together in a familiar cross-shaped seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The air on the deck of the submarine exploded with puffs of smoke. Not 10, not 100, but 1,000 perfect copies of Naruto Uzumaki appeared, packed shoulder to shoulder, a silent army of one. The samurai gasped. Law's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of his profound shock. He had seen strange abilities. But this was tactical supremacy on a scale he'd never imagined. You are not to engage, the real Naruto commanded, his voice echoing from 1,000 mouths at once. You are the eyes, the ears, and the hands of this invasion. You will infiltrate, map every tunnel, count every enemy, relay their positions, sabotage their cannons, evacuate our wounded, create diversions. You will be ghosts, you will be whispers. You give our main forces a clear path to their targets. Go. In a flash of orange and black, the clones dispersed, silent as falling leaves. They leapt into the water, scaled the sheer cliffs, and vanished into the shadows of Onagashima's labyrinthine structure. The effect was immediate. On the main battlefield, a samurai squadron to be ambushed by an armored division was suddenly warned by a clone that appeared from a sewer grate. A volley of cannon fire aimed at the minks was silenced when a Naruto clone sabotaged the gunpowder storage. Wounded warriors found themselves being dragged to safety by a silent, determined copy who would perform rudimentary first aid before dissolving back into the chaos. Kinemon stared, utterly speechless. This one man had just become an army's worth of spies, saboteurs, and medics. He had turned a chaotic charge into a surgical operation. Uzumaki Dono, you are just a shinobi, Naruto said, standing up. His gaze was fixed on the giant skull dome. He could feel the immense, drunken power of Kaido, the blazing hot energy of King, the noxious aura of Queen, and the overwhelming power of Big Mom. But he also felt Luffy, a comet of pure, idiotic determination, already inside and making a scene. He couldn't help but smile. Beside him, Yamato hefted her kanabo, Takaru, onto her shoulder. The excitement of battle was rolling off her in waves. That was amazing, Naruto. Just like a ninja from the stories Oden read. Something like that, he replied, his smile softening as he looked at her. Her horns, her fierce makeup, the raw power she radiated, none of it fazed him anymore. He just saw Yamato, burning bright and eager for a fight. Luffy is drawing the big guns. That's our cue. What's our role in this grand play? She asked, her eyes glittering. Naruto's gaze sharpened, turning back to the fortress. We're the linebackers. The main forces will handle the rank and file. The scabbards are going for Kaido. Luffy will fight whoever he finds. Our job is to intercept the problems that no one else can handle. He took a deep breath, his senses spreading out, filtering through the reports of his clones. A flash of brilliant blue fire in the main performance hall caught his attention. A powerful, familiar energy was being pressed. And I just found our first problem, he said, his body tensing. A man of blue fire is fighting two monsters. He's strong, but he's outnumbered. He looked at Yamato, ready for a run. She grinned, a flash of sharp teeth. I was born ready. The live floor of Onagashima's keep was a hellscape of fire, poison, and destruction. Marco the Phoenix, his body wreathed in the cerulean flames of rebirth, soared through the air, his talons clashing with the sword of a grim-faced man in black leather. King the Wildfire, Kaido's right hand, was relentless, his movements a blur of speed and power. Every time Marco landed a blow, the flames of regeneration would heal him. But the effort was taxing. Worse still was the other figure. Queen the Plague, a grotesque cyborg brachiosaurus, laughed maniacally as he fired beams of shimmering energy from his mouth. Give it up, Yoi. You can't regenerate forever. My lasers will wear you down, and then my Ice Oni Plague will give you a whole new look. Marco grit his teeth, diving to avoid Allah, Esser that incinerated a section of the stage. He was one of the most powerful pirates in the world, a former commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, but fighting two Yonko commanders at once was a fool's game. He was buying time, creating a diversion for Luffy and the others, but his stamina was finite. King appeared above him in a flash, his leg drawn back for a devastating axe kick. Marco brought his flaming wings up to block, the impact sending a shockwave that cracked the floor. You should have stayed retired, Phoenix, King said, his voice a cold monotone. From the ground, Queen took aim. Say cheese. Brachio laser. Marco was trapped. Block King, and the laser would hit him. Dodge the laser, and King's blow would shatter his bones faster than he could heal. Suddenly, a massive wall of sea, crystalline ice erupted from the floor between him and Queen. The laser struck the ice, sending up a huge cloud of steam and shattered shards, but the wall held. Queen blinked in surprise. Huh, who's playing with ice? At the same time, a blur of orange shot past Marco's left. Naruto, his hand crackling with blue energy, appeared beside King in midair. You're wide open. He slammed a Rasengan into the Lunarian's side. It wasn't coated in hockey, so it didn't do critical damage against King's natural defenses, but the sheer rotational force was enough to send the commander spinning away like a top, his attack completely neutralized. Marco landed, panting, and stared at the two newcomers who now stood between him and the calamities. Yamato stood with her kanabo resting on her shoulder, the lore around her frosted from the ice wall she had just created. Naruto stood in a low crouch, his blue eyes narrowed, radiating a quiet, dangerous energy. Well, Queen hummed, his metallic jaw clicking. If it isn't Kaido's idiot son. And who's your little orange friend? Come to join the party. I am not his son. Yamato roared, pointing her club at the cyborg. I am Kazuki Odin, and I'm here to take your heads. King righted himself in the air, a thin trail of smoke rising from his side where the Rasengan had hit. He looked at Naruto, his gaze analytical. You're not from Wano. That energy, it's strange. Doesn't matter who he is. Queen cackled. He's with the enemy, so we crush him. Naruto ignored them. He glanced back at Marco. You look tired. Go help the others. We'll take care of these two. Marco looked from Naruto to Yamato, then at the two formidable commanders. He saw the unwavering confidence in the blonde man's eyes. He felt the raw, untamed power rolling off the horned woman. He let out a weary chuckle. The new generation is really something else, yoi. He didn't need to be told twice. With a nod, he took to the air and flew off to support the other fronts, his blue flames a beacon of hope. Big talk for a little man, Queen sneered at Naruto. Let's see how you handle this. Ice Oni. The cyborg opened his mouth and fired a volley of strange, crystalline bullets. Naruto's eyes widened. His clones had reported on this. A plague that turned its victims into mindless, ice-spewing monsters. Don't let them touch you. Yamato shouted. Naruto didn't need the warning. He closed his eyes for a split second, drawing on the natural energy of the world. It was harder here, in this fortress of steel and suffering, but he found it. The rich, vibrant life force of Onigashima itself. Groaning under Kaido's boot, he pulled it into himself. Orange pigment flared into existence around his eyes, stretching up to his hairline. His pupils shifted, becoming horizontal bars like those of a toad. A wave of immense, tangible power washed over the battlefield, a pressure so dense it felt like the air itself had turned to water. He had entered Sage mode. His senses exploded. He could feel the airflow around every single plague bullet. He could sense the buildup of energy in Queen's cyborg parts. He could feel the heat radiating from the flames on King's back. Everything slowed down, becoming crisp and clear. He moved. He flowed between the plague bullets with an impossible grace, the crystalline projectiles passing harmlessly by. He appeared before Queen in an instant, his fist drawn back. Kawazu Kumite. Frog Kata. The punch was infused with Senjutsu chakra, surrounding his fist in an aura of natural energy that acted as an extension of his body. He didn't even need to make contact. The aura slammed into Queen's massive chin, and the multi-ton cyborg was lifted off his feet, his head snapping back with a loud crack of stressed metal. While Queen was airborne, King dove from above, his sword wreathed in flames, aiming to decapitate Naruto. Namuji Hyo. Glacier Fang. Yamato swung Takaru, unleashing a wave of freezing cold that met King's fire. Steam erupted, obscuring the battlefield. Through the mist, Yamato charged, her kanabo coated in the dark, crackling lightning of Conqueror's Haki. Reimei Hake. Thunder Bagua. She met King in a titanic clash of wills. Club against sword. The impact shook the entire dome, the floor beneath them cracking and splintering. This was their rhythm. Naruto, with his sage-enhanced speed and senses, would handle the bizarre science and overwhelming numbers of Queen's arsenal, while Yamato, with her monstrous strength and haki, would go head-to-head with the nigh-indestructible force that was King. Naruto watched Yamato fight, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. He had seen armament haki before, watching Luffy and Zoro. It was a coating, a spiritual armor. But what Yamato and King were doing was different. Their weapons weren't just coated. They were overflowing with a power that didn't even need to touch to cause damage. Conqueror's coating. The will of a king made manifest. Willpower, Naruto thought, dodging a volley of rockets from a recovering queen. The stronger the will, the stronger the armor. It's like spiritual energy. An idea sparked in his mind. His chakra was his life energy. Haki was the world's spiritual energy. What if he could merge the concepts? He formed a Rasengan in his hand, the perfect sphere of chakra spinning violently. Then, he focused his will, not just his chakra. He poured his unbending determination, the will to protect, the will to never give up, the will of a Hokage, into the attack. It was clumsy, instinctual, nothing like the refined control of a master like Zoro or Luffy. But something happened. A shimmering, obsidian sheath began to form around the blue sphere. It wasn't the smooth, perfect coating of a seasoned user. It was patchy, raw, crackling with untamed black sparks. It was armament haki, forced into being by sheer guts and fused with his own jutsu. Queen, having shaken off the earlier blow, charged him. "I'll stomp you into a paste, you little brat." Naruto met the charge, shoving his new creation forward. Senpo. Haki Rasengan. Sage Art. Haki Rasengan. The impact was devastating. The black-coated sphere didn't just grind, it shattered. It tore through Queen's metallic hide like it was parchment, the combined force of the senjutsu and the raw haki creating a destructive resonance that blew a massive, smoking hole straight through the cyborg's belly. Queen screamed, a sound of agony and disbelief, as he was blasted across the hall, crashing into a wall with enough force to bring a section of the roof down. Meanwhile, Yamato was being pushed back by King. The Lunarian shifted his tactics. The flame on his back shrank, and his speed increased exponentially. He became a black blur, zipping around her, landing a dozen shallow but painful cuts before she could even react. "You're strong, daughter of Kaido," King said, his voice coming from all directions at once. "But you are too predictable. You rely on single, powerful blows." He appeared behind her, sword aimed for her neck. Her observation haki flared, and she spun to block, but she was a fraction too late. She wouldn't be the one hit. Naruto, even while finishing his attack on Queen, had felt King's intent. His sage mode senses gave him the precious split second of precognition he needed. He appeared between King's blade and Yamato's back in a flicker of movement. He couldn't block it. The angle was wrong, the speed too great. He just took it. King's flaming sword sliced deep into Naruto's back and shoulder. The pain was sharp, searing, a white-hot agony that made him grunt. But he didn't cry out. He used the momentum of the blow to spin, planting his foot on King's chest and kicking off, putting distance between them and giving Yamato room. He landed near her, stumbling, his left arm hanging uselessly. Blood soaked through the back of his orange jacket, steaming where the flames had cauterized the wound. "Naruto!" Yamato cried, her eyes wide with horror and fury. The sight of him, injured for her sake, lit a fire in her that burned hotter than any of King's flames. The Odin persona, the calculated imitation of a hero, vanished completely, replaced by a raw, protective rage that was entirely her own. "Don't touch him," she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Her devil fruit powers activated, not as a conscious choice, but as an extension of her rage. Frost exploded from her body, coating her skin in a layer of shimmering ice armor. Her canines elongated. She wasn't imitating Odin anymore. She was embracing her own power. The power of the mythical wolf deity that resided within her. She was a monster defending one of its own. "You!" she roared at King. The temperature on the live floor plummeted. She didn't wait for him. She charged, her speed now rivaling King's own, her feet skating on a path of ice she created as she moved. She was a blizzard of righteous fury. King, surprised by her sudden transformation and the sheer ferocity of her aura, was put on the defensive. Naruto watched her, a pained smile on his face. He leaned against a broken pillar, gathering his breath. The wound was bad, but Sage Mode was already working on it, accelerating his healing factor. He looked at her, at the fearsome, beautiful wolf goddess she had become, and he didn't see Odin. He saw Yamato, and she was magnificent. He had bought her an opening. Now it was his turn again. He created a single shadow clone. The clone ran towards the dueling pair. Yamato, feeling its presence, didn't even need to look. On pure instinct, as she swung her kanabo in a wide arc at King, she lowered its trajectory at the last second. The clone leapt onto the swinging club. "Now!" the real Naruto yelled. With a final, mighty heave, Yamato swung Takaru upwards, launching the clone like a cannonball straight at King. The clone, sailing through the air, formed a massive Rasengan, pouring all its remaining energy into it. Odama Rasengan. King, occupied with Yamato's relentless assault, had no time to react to the projectile from above. The massive sphere of chakra slammed into his back, driving him down towards the ground. At the same moment, Yamato brought her own haki-infused club crashing down on him in a perfect pincer attack. The combined impact was apocalyptic. The floor of the dome shattered, and King, the last conscious calamity, was driven deep into the bedrock of Onigashima, defeated. Silence, broken only by their ragged breathing. Queen was a smoking wreck. King was buried. The fight was over. Naruto's sage mode faded, and the pain returned with a vengeance. He sagged against the pillar, his vision swimming. Yamato rushed to his side, her devil fruit transformation receding, her face a mask of frantic concern. "You idiot," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she gently supported him. "Why did you do that? You could have died. You were open," he rasped, looking up at her. "My job is to watch your back." They stared at each other for a long moment, the chaos of the raid fading into a distant hum. Then, a shared, breathless laugh escaped both of them. It was a laugh of exhaustion, of victory, of the sheer, insane thrill of being alive. "We make a good team," he said. "The best," she agreed, her hand lingering on his uninjured shoulder. While the calamities were falling, a different, more insidious battle was being waged in the fortress's upper floors. Kinemon and the other scabbards had finally reached the rooftop, only to be intercepted by Kaido. But a different threat had emerged from the shadows. Two figures, identical to the herald from Udon but made of a darker, obsidian-like material with silver filigree, materialized behind Kinemon. They were Weavers, Advanced Scouts D, assigned with the data from the first encounter. Their purpose was to attack the spirit, the will itself, the source of Haki. Before Kinemon could react, one of the Weavers phased a hand through his chest. It didn't draw blood. Instead, an agonizing cold spread through him, and his connection to his own Haki, his own fighting spirit, flickered like a dying candle. He fell to his knees, his swords clattering to the ground. "Kin-san!" Kiku cried out. The Weavers moved to do the same to the others, their movements silent and unstoppable. But just as one reached for Raizo, a voice echoed through the corridor, light and airy, yet filled with a chilling power. "Yo-ho-ho-ho. Pardon my intrusion, but I cannot allow you to dampen the spirits of our allies. It's simply not good form." Brook, the Soul King, stood there, his sword drawn. The Weavers tilted their faceless heads. New energy signature detected. Non-corporeal, ectoplasmic, not Haki, not devil fruit. "My soul is so cold it will give you frostbite," Brook declared, and dashed forward. His blade, chilled by the very essence of the underworld, sliced through the air. One of the Weavers tried to phase through the attack, but Brook's soul-solid blade struck true. The Weaver shrieked, a sound of static and dying light, as the soul-cutting energy disrupted its ethereal form. At the same time, another Naruto clone appeared, this one radiating the faint golden energy of his main body's sage mode. It had been part of the clone network, a relay, and had come as soon as it felt Kinemon's energy fade. It didn't waste time on words. It blurred past Brook, its hands flying through seals. Fuinjutsu, Kongo Fusa, sealing jutsu, adamantine sealing chains. Golden chains erupted from the clone's back, wrapping around the second Weaver. The creature struggled, its form flickering as it tried to phase out, but the chains, designed to seal away even-tailed beasts, held it fast. The clone then slammed its palm onto the Weaver's head. Seal. The silver filigree on the Weaver's body glowed intensely, and then it collapsed into a small, inert obsidian doll, the chains retracting into the clone, which then dissolved, its mission complete. The first Weaver, heavily damaged by Brook's attack, assessed the new threats, a soul manipulator and a master of spiritual sealing, and chose to retreat, dissolving into particles of shadow. Brook stood over the fallen Kinemon, who was slowly regaining his senses. The musician swordsman looked at the spot where the creatures had been, a shiver running down his spine, though he had no spine to shiver. "My word," he murmured. What in the world were those things? The sounds of battle from the rooftop were cataclysmic. Luffy had reached Kaido. The clash of two kings shook the very foundations of Onigashima. Naruto and Yamato, battered but resolute, were making their way up, helping other fighters along the way. Then, for a moment, the world fell silent. Kaido's overwhelming presence, which had been a raging inferno at the top of the dome, suddenly flared, triumphant. And Luffy's, that bright, burning sun of defiance, vanished. A wave of despair washed over the allied forces. On the live floor, Chopper looked up, tears in his eyes. "Luffy." Kaido's voice boomed across the island, amplified by his power. "Straw Hat Luffy is dead. Your hope is gone. Surrender now, and I will grant you a merciful death as laborers." The morale of the samurai and pirates shattered. The fight drained out of them. It was over. Yamato stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth. No, it can't be. Naruto grabbed her arm, his grip steady. Even as his own heart plummeted. He had felt it too. Luffy's energy, completely snuffed out. He thought of Jiraiya, of Neji, the familiar, sickening feeling of loss. But then, thump, a sound, faint, distant, but undeniable. Thump thump. It grew louder, a steady, rhythmic beat. It wasn't a war drum. It was something deeper, something primal. It resonated in their bones, in their very souls. It sounded like a giant heart. Thump dump, thump dump. The beat became a joyous, ridiculous rhythm. On the rooftop, the supposedly dead Luffy began to laugh. A deep, booming laugh that held no malice, only pure, unadulterated mirth. Kaido looked down in shock. What? Luffy's body began to change. His hair and clothes bleached to a ghostly white. A cloud of steam, like the sash of a deity, formed around his neck. His very form seemed to become fluid, cartoonish. He wasn't just reawakened. He was reborn. Naruto felt it. The energy that washed over the island wasn't the grim determination of a warrior. It was joy. It was liberation. It was the sound of shackles breaking, of pure, untethered freedom. It was an energy so fundamentally good that it defied description. He looked up at the broken dome, a slow smile spreading across his face. He didn't know what this was, but he knew Luffy hadn't lost. He had just become what he was always meant to be. Yamato stared upwards, her eyes wide with awe. She clutched the logbook at her waist. Oden had written of Joy Boy. He had written of the dawn. He had never described what it would look like. But this feeling, this absurd, joyous, liberating rhythm, this had to be it. This was the dawn. The chaos of the raid swirled around them, falling debris, terrified shouts, cries of renewed hope. In the midst of it all, Naruto and Yamato simply stood, looking up at the sky where a new god was laughing. His hand, unconsciously, found hers. It wasn't a gesture of passion or romance. It was an anchor, a small, solid point of contact in a world that had just been turned completely upside down. Her fingers laced with his, a silent acknowledgement of the shared moment, of the history they were witnessing together. Battered, bloody, and exhausted, they stood united, watching the sun rise at midnight. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Whisper of a Dying Star. The celebration in the Flower Capital was a symphony of life reborn. For 20 years, Wano had been a country holding its breath, and now, with Kaido and Big Mom defeated and Orochi's tyranny a fading nightmare, it exhaled in a joyous, riotous roar of liberation. Lanterns painted the night with vibrant colors. The air was thick with the smell of festival food and celebratory sake, and the sound of shamisen and laughter echoed from every street corner. The Straw Hat Pirates were at the heart of it all. Hailed as saviors, Luffy, back to his normal, rubbery self, was engaged in a one-man war against the city's entire supply of meat, his stomach a bottomless pit of victory. Zoro was in a drinking contest with the remaining samurai, his legendary tolerance for alcohol being put to its greatest test. Sanji was a whirlwind of culinary brilliance, cooking for WH. It seemed like the entire population while simultaneously declaring his undying love for every woman who passed by. Naruto sat on the steps of a small shrine, slightly apart from the main throng, a cup of warm tea cradled in his hands. He watched the chaos with a faint, bittersweet smile. The scene was so familiar it ached. It was the joy after the pain, the feast after the war. But it wasn't his feast. It wasn't his war. He was a ghost at their victory party. His wounds, both physical and spiritual, were healing, but the chasm that separated him from his own world felt wider than ever in this moment of profound, communal joy. "You're thinking too loud again." He looked up. Yamato stood before him, having traded her battle-worn robes for a simple, elegant yukata. Without the mask and the fury, with her hair tied back loosely. She looked softer, younger. She sat down beside him, her own cup of tea steaming in the cool night air. The explosive cuffs were gone, removed by a grateful and highly skilled blacksmith, leaving only faint red marks on her wrists, scars that would fade with time. "Is it that obvious?" Naruto asked, his smile turning a little more genuine. "Only to me," she said, her tone matter of fact. She took a sip of her tea, her gaze following his to the celebrating crowd. They love you, you know. All of them. They call you the Konpaku no Arashi, the whirlwind of spirit. The silent storm that saved hundreds of lives. I just made some clones, he said with a shrug. You did more than that, she corrected him, her voice soft. You gave them a chance. You fought for them, for people you didn't know, in a land that wasn't yours. That's the heart of a true samurai. She paused, then a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. Or a Hokage, I suppose. He chuckled, a real, warm sound. I guess they're not so different. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the noise of the festival a pleasant backdrop. Their shared battles had forged a bond that transcended words. It was in the way she leaned slightly closer to him, in the way he was unconsciously aware of her presence as a point of stability in this alien world. So, he said, breaking the silence. Now that you're free, truly free, what's next for Kazuki Oden? He used the name teasingly, a gentle jab. She looked down at her logbook, which she still carried tucked in her sash, a habit of a lifetime. Oden's journey is over. He saw the world. He returned home to free it. He did his part. She turned the book over in her hands, her expression thoughtful. For 20 years, I thought being free meant being him. But fighting alongside you, alongside Luffy, I think I was wrong. She turned to face him, her orange-gold eyes serious and clear. Being free isn't about following someone else's path. It's about making your own. My dream, I think my dream is just to see it all. The world beyond these walls. The endless sea, the sky islands, the fish men, all the things Oden wrote about. I want to see them with my own eyes. Not as Oden, but as Yamato. The confession was quiet but monumental. It was the sound of a prisoner walking out of her cell for the first time. Naruto felt a surge of pride for her. He had asked her that question in the ruins of Kuri, and now, she had found her own answer. That's a good dream, he said softly. Is it a dream you could share? She asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Her gaze suddenly intense. You're lost, Naruto. You don't have a map home. So, until you find one, maybe your path could be on the sea. With us. Before he could answer, the world went wrong. It began with the silence. The music stopped. The laughter died. The cheerful hum of 10,000 people vanished as if a switch had been thrown. A profound, unnatural cold descended upon the flower capital. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with dread. Every lantern, every bonfire, flickered and died, plunging the city into an oppressive darkness, lit only by the full moon. Then, the sky tore open. It wasn't a violent rip like the one that had brought Naruto here. This was a silent, surgical incision in the fabric of the night. A perfect, black circle appeared in the heavens, a hole in reality that swallowed the stars. From it, a figure descended, not with the grace of an angel, but with the dead, silent finality of a guillotine's blade. He was tall and slender, clad in flowing white robes that seemed to absorb the moonlight. His skin was a pale, corpse-like gray, and his hair was the color of bleached bone. A single, blood-red Rinnegan glowed in the center of his forehead, and his eyes, cold and black as the void, held an ancient, chilling intelligence. He carried no weapons, but floating behind him were two black receiver rods. Identical to the ones Naruto had seen so many times before. This was no herald, no scout. This was a predator. This was Omoikane, the favored champion of Kagutsuchi Otsutsuki, a purifier of worlds. He landed in the center of the main festival square without a sound, the ground not even cracking beneath his feet. He surveyed the terrified, frozen crowd, his expression one of utter, clinical disgust. Such chaos. Omoikane's voice was a whisper that carried to every corner of the silent city, a sibilant hiss that crawled under the skin. Such impurity. This world is diseased, a cacophony of aberrant energies. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, their post-battle exhaustion vanishing in a surge of adrenaline, were instantly on their feet, moving to place themselves between the newcomer and the defenseless citizens. Who the hell are you? Luffy demanded, his hands clenching into fists. Omoikane's dead eyes slid past him, dismissing him as one might an insect. His gaze swept the crowd, searching. And then it locked onto the shrine steps. It locked onto Naruto. A flicker of something. Not quite emotion, but a cold, intellectual satisfaction, passed across his features. "There you are," he whispered. "The heretic, Naruto Uzumaki. You have led me to another nest of contagion." He turned his chilling gaze on Naruto. "Your flight from your duty ends now. You abandoned your world to its fate. You allowed your genetic material, the vessel of a tailed beast, to become contaminated by the chaotic energies of this dimension. Lord Kagutsuchi has declared you anathema. You are a failure who ran from his sacrifice." Every word was a perfectly crafted blade aimed at Naruto's deepest insecurities. Abandoned your duty, failure, ran. The guilt that he had been holding at bay, the fear that he had made the wrong choice, flared up in his chest. But then he looked at Yamato beside him, at the terrified faces in the crowd, at Luffy and his crew standing defiant against a godlike threat. These people had taken him in. They had shown him kindness. They had fought alongside him. This was his place now. This was his home. The guilt was washed away by a cold, righteous anger. Naruto stood up, his body thrumming with a power he hadn't fully unleashed since his arrival. The orange pigment of sage mode flared around his eyes instantly, and the golden chakra of the nine tails cloaked his body, forming a brilliant, fiery silhouette. He didn't shout. He didn't make a grand declaration. "Get away from my friends," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Omoikane showed his first sign of emotion, a faint, contemptuous smile. "Your friends," he hissed. "These mongrels. These aberrations of will and flesh." He raised a hand, and one of his black rods shot forward, not at Naruto, but at a terrified child cowering behind her mother. Zoro moved, a blur of green and steel, intending to intercept it. But the rod passed straight through his hockey-coated blade as if it were smoke. It never reached the child. Naruto was just there. He appeared between the rod and the girl in a flicker of golden light, catching the black receiver in his bare hand. The rod sizzled against his chakra-cloaked skin, but he held it firm, his glare never leaving Omoikane. "I said," Naruto repeated, his voice dropping to a near sub-zero temperature as he crushed the rod into dust, "Get away from them." The battle was joined. Luffy, seeing the threat, didn't hesitate. Gear forth. Snake Man. His body swelled, steam pouring from him as he coated his limbs in black hockey. Gomu Gomu no Black Mamba. His fists became a storm of punches, changing direction unpredictably as they rocketed toward Omoikane. Omoikane simply stood his ground. He raised one hand. Mute. A translucent purple field, 5 feet in diameter, shimmered into existence in front of him. Luffy's hockey-infused fists passed into the field and immediately recoiled, the rubber losing its tension, the hockey dissipating like smoke. Luffy stared at his hands in shock. It felt as if his devil fruit power had been turned off. "Your abilities are a corruption of biology," Omoikane stated calmly. "A virus upon the natural order. I have simply introduced the antivirus." He flicked his wrist, and a dozen more black rods materialized, shooting toward the other Straw Hats. Zoro and Sanji leapt into action. Diabol Hambi. Flambage shot. Sanji's flaming kick sent a wave of fire to intercept the rods, but they passed through the flames unharmed. Zoro unleashed a flying sword slash, but the rods phased through the hockey-infused blade just as the first one had. It was Yamato who saved them. "Mirror Mountain," she roared, slamming her kanabo into the ground. A massive, thick wall of ice erupted, catching the rods. Unlike the energy-based attacks, the physical ice stopped them cold, embedding them deep within its structure. Omoikane tilted his head, his gaze falling on her. A hybrid, an impure mix of beast and man. Another abomination to be purged. He vanished, not with speed, but by ceasing to be in one place and appearing in another. He was suddenly behind Yamato, his hand outstretched, palm glowing with a terrifying, destructive light. He never touched her. A golden arm, massive and spectral, made of pure energy, erupted from Naruto's back and slammed into Omoikane, sending him flying across the square and crashing into a pagoda, which splintered and collapsed on top of him. It was a chakra arm, a manifestation of the Nine Tails' power. Naruto was now standing in front of Yamato, a protective shield. "Don't you dare touch her." From the rubble, Omoikane emerged without a scratch, brushing dust from his pristine robes. "Fascinating. Your chakra has integrated with this world's energies. It has become willful. No matter. All impurities must be cleansed. This time, he targeted Naruto directly. He moved with a speed that left afterimages, his taijutsu a fluid, deadly ballet. But Naruto, in his combined Sage and Kurama mode, was his equal. Their fists and feet met in a series of sonic booms that shook the city. Naruto's frog kata, enhanced by the Nine Tails power, was powerful and unpredictable. Omoikane's style was sterile, precise. Each blow aimed at a vital point, a chakra node. It was a battle of philosophies made manifest. Naruto's messy, emotional, powerful style against Omoikane's cold, sterile, perfect technique. But Omoikane had an advantage. Every time Naruto landed a blow, the Otsutsuki would absorb a portion of the chakra, his own power growing. Naruto felt his reserves being siphoned away, a chilling, vampiric drain. He was getting weaker, and Omoikane was getting stronger. At the same time, the rest of the Straw Hats were struggling. Omoikane's ability to mute devil fruits and phase through hockey-infused attacks made him an impossible opponent. Every time they tried to land a blow, it was negated. "It's no use," Jinbei shouted, his water-based attacks parting around the Otsutsuki's body. "Our attacks don't work." Luffy, frustrated and angry, looked at his friend being worn down. He saw the citizens of Wano, the people he'd just freed, cowering in terror. He saw his crew, the strongest people he knew, rendered useless. A fire lit in his eyes. The drums began to beat again. Thump dump, thump dump. "That's enough," Luffy roared, and the world exploded in white light. His hair turned to white flame. The divine sash of steam reappeared. His laughter, manic and liberating, filled the air. Gear 5th was back. "The sun god," Omoikane whispered, his cold composure finally cracked. With a hint of what might have been fear. An ancient, chaotic variable. It must be erased before it can spread. He abandoned Naruto, turning his full attention to Luffy. But Luffy was no longer bound by the normal rules of combat. Gomu Gomu no, Gigant. Luffy swelled to the size of a mountain, his giant foot, coated in the pure white of his awakened haki, coming down to crush Omoikane. The Otsutsuki simply raised a hand, a black vortex of space-time appearing above him to swallow the attack. But Luffy just laughed, his giant form stretching and warping like a cartoon. He grabbed the EDG's of the vortex with his hands and stretched it wide, like a piece of dough. "My turn," he yelled, and pulled himself through the portal, appearing directly behind a stunned Omoikane, his fist the size of a house. The two gods clashed. The white, chaotic freedom of Nika against the black, ordered sterility of the Otsutsuki. The very ground warped around them, reality itself struggling to keep up with the clash of their wills. Naruto watched, panting, his chakra reserves dangerously low. He had to end this. Luffy was holding him, but Omoikane was still absorbing energy, still adapting. He couldn't be beaten by brute force alone. He looked at Yamato. She was staring at him, her face pale with worry. He saw it then. The answer. His home wasn't a place. It was people. It was the bonds he forged. Hinata, Boruto, Himawari. They were his anchor to his past. But Luffy, Yamato, all the Straw Hats, they were his anchor to his present. To his future. He wasn't a failure who had run. He was a protector who had made a sacrifice. And he would do it again. This was his home now. These were his people, and he would not let them be harmed. With that final, absolute resolution, something inside him settled. The conflict, the guilt, the grief, it didn't vanish, but it found its place. And in that moment of emotional clarity, his power answered. He closed his eyes and molded his chakra. Not just the Nine Tails power. Not just Sage mode. He reached deeper, to the very core of what the Sage of Six Paths had given him. All of it. He opened his eyes. His pupils were now a cross of the Sage's bar and the Nine Tails slit. His golden cloak became brighter, more solid, and 9 black truth-seeking orbs, the ultimate defense and offense, materialized behind him, humming with primordial power. He had fully entered Six Paths Sage mode. He and Luffy locked eyes across the battlefield. No words were needed. A shared grin, a nod. The whirlwind and the sun. They moved as one. Luffy grabbed the very ground beneath Omoikane, turning it to rubber and stretching it, flinging the Otsutsuki into the air. Naruto appeared above him in a flash of gold, his truth-seeking orbs forming a cage. "You cannot contain me, heretic," Omoikane snarled, attempting to phase through the orbs. But they weren't Haki. They were the embodiment of all creation, and they negated his abilities completely. He was trapped. Naruto and Luffy attacked together. A golden Rasenshuriken, crackling with natural energy, and a pure white fist, imbued with the will of a god of liberation. The two attacks, one of order and creation, the other of chaos and freedom, merged into a singular, overwhelming force. Taijutsu Rasengan, Supreme Ultimate Rasengan, Gomu Gomu no Bajrang Gun. The combined attack struck the trapped Omoikane. There was no explosion, just a silent, all-consuming flash of white and gold light. When it faded, Omoikane was gone. Not dead, not blasted away. Erased, utterly and completely unmade. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, the moonlit sky began to bleed light as the sun crested the horizon. The unnatural darkness receded. The lanterns flickered back to life. The festival could begin again. Luffy, his Gear 5th transformation fading, dropped from the sky, caught effortlessly by Frankie and Jinbei. Naruto swayed, his own ultimate mode vanishing, the exertion sending black spots dancing in his vision. He would have collapsed, but two strong arms wrapped around him, supporting his weight. Yamato held him, her face buried in his shoulder. He could feel her trembling. I thought he was going to," she whispered, her voice choked. He leaned his weight against her, his exhaustion absolute. "I told you," he rasped. "I watch your back." That night, after the second, frantic round of celebrations had calmed, Yamato found him by a quiet stream at the edge of the capital. She had a medical kit, and she insisted on tending to the cuts and bruises that Chopper hadn't gotten to yet. The gash on his back from King's sword had already sealed over, leaving behind a faint, pink scar. "Your healing is incredible," she murmured, her fingers gently tracing the new scar. "Comes with the territory," he said, his voice quiet. They were silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her back still to him. "When he targeted me, that Otsutsuki person, and you took that blow for me." Before, in the castle, Naruto didn't respond, letting her find her words. "And then tonight, you put yourself between me and him again." Without a second's thought, she turned to face him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Why?" He looked at her, at the genuine confusion and vulnerability in her expression. He thought of all the times he'd thrown himself in front of Sasuke, of Sakura, of Hinata. It was just who he was. But this was different. The thought of Omoikane's hand touching her, of that sterile evil snuffing out her bright, wild fire, it had ignited a protective instinct in him fiercer than any he'd ever felt. "Because," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name, "the thought of a world without you in it, it's not a world I want to live in." The confession hung in the air between them, simple, honest, and devastating. Her breath hitched. The Odin persona was a distant memory. The fierce warrior was gone. In her place was just Yamato, a young woman who had been starved of genuine affection her entire life, now being offered the one thing she never knew she wanted. She closed the distance between them in 2 short steps. Her hands came up to cup his face, her touch gentle, hesitant. "Naruto." He looked into her eyes and saw his own feelings reflected there. Fear, hope, and a deep, resonant connection that felt as old as the world itself. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their first kiss was not one of triumphant passion. It was quiet, desperate, and deeply, deeply earned. It was the taste of salty tears and festival sake, of ozone from a battle with a god, of the promise of a shared dawn. It was 2 lost souls, a fallen sage and a freed prisoner, finding a new compass point in each other. It was the whisper of a promise in the quiet aftermath of a storm. As Omoikane was erased, a final, silent scream echoed across dimensions. On a throne of black, crystalline material in a dead, empty world, Kagutsuchi Otsutsuki opened his eyes. The link to his champion was gone. But before it had severed, it had transmitted one final, perfect packet of data. The dimensional frequency of this world. The nature of Haki. The chaotic signature of the sun god. And the face of the heretic who stood at the center of it all. So, Kagutsuchi mused, a sliver of obsidian forming in his hand, a new, more powerful weapon. The infection has a champion. And the heretic has found a new nest. His hunt was no longer a simple retrieval. It was now a purification. Meanwhile, in the pristine, sterile halls of Mary Geoise, the highest seat of the world government, the 5 elders stood before the empty throne. They had received the reports from their CP0 agents in Wano. Reports of a second sun god. Of a man in orange who commanded an army of himself. Of a battle that had leveled a section of the capital and involved powers beyond their comprehension. The shadowy figure of Amu, the true sovereign of the world, held up a single, newly printed piece of paper. It was a bounty poster. The image was a candid shot of Naruto, caught mid-battle, his eyes glowing with golden power. The name read, Naruto Uzumaki. The bounty was not a number. It was a single phrase that sent a chill down the spines of even these hardened old men, dead or alive. The power of a god. Amu spoke, its voice a chorus of ancient whispers. This cannot be allowed. The balance is threatened. Capture the heretic. Seize the power of the god. The world does not have room for so many deities. The order was given. The might of the world government was now aimed squarely at the Thousand Sunny. Back in Wano, the party was finally over. The crew was preparing to depart, their ranks now unofficially larger. Yamato stood before Luffy, her expression resolute. Luffy, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. I want to join your crew. I want to sail the seas as one of your nakama. Luffy looked at her, then glanced at Naruto, who was standing nearby, a quiet smile on his face. Naruto gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a request, it was an endorsement. She's one of us. Luffy's signature grin stretched across his face. All right, shishishi. It'll be fun. The Straw Hat Pirates, now boasting a roster that could challenge the heavens, had 2 new powerhouses. Their next adventure was just over the horizon, but so were the shadows of an approaching celestial tyrant and a threatened worldly throne, both converging on their small, cheerful ship. The sea was about to get a whole lot stormier. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Empty Throne's Shadow. The Thousand Sunny cut through the azure waters of the New World, a vibrant splash of color against the endless blue. The air, free from the oppressive gloom of Wano, was crisp and clean, led with the scent of salt and adventure. On the lawn deck, a strange sort of domesticity had settled. Luffy was fishing, using his own arm as a line. Chopper and Usopp were tinkering with a new plant for Usopp's arsenal. Zoro was sleeping, naturally. Near the galley, Naruto sat at a table with Robin, a stack of books between them. The past week had been a crash course in language and history. His shinobi mind, trained for information gathering and retention, absorbed the new tongue with astonishing speed. He was no longer reliant on gestures, he could speak, his accent strange but his meaning clear. The void century, he murmured, tracing a finger over a rubbing from a Wano poneglyph. An entire 100-year period, erased from history by this world government. And this, initial, it keeps appearing. The enemies of the gods, Robin said, her voice a low murmur as she sipped her coffee. She watched him, intrigued. He wasn't just learning, he was connecting dots, seeing patterns with a strategist's eye. He saw history not as a story, but as a battlefield of ideologies. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken by the sudden appearance of a shadow clone beside them. It looked identical to Naruto, but its expression was one of intense concentration. I've got something, the clone said, its voice a low hum. It held out its hand, a small, transponder snail, a den mushi, in its palm. This was one of a dozen clones Naruto had scattered across the nearby seas, a silent, invisible intelligence network that stretched for miles around the Sunny. They were his early warning system, his eyes beyond the horizon. It's a coded Navy channel, the clone continued. High-level encryption. But they're repeating a keyword. I was able to isolate the signal. It tapped the shell of the snail, and a distorted, crackling voice filled the air, repeating a single phrase amidst a sea of static. Seraphim Omega. Confirmation. Seraphim Omega, on schedule. The real Naruto's eyes narrowed. Omega. The end. Sounds like a weapon. The clone nodded. They're routing all marine traffic away from a specific set of coordinates. A barren, uncharted island near the archipelago where Egghead is supposed to be. They're calling the location, Tartarus Base. Robin's blood ran cold. Tartarus. In the old tales, it was the prison of the Titans, the enemies of the gods. At that moment, Yamato emerged from the galley, carrying a tray with 2 tall glasses of iced tea. She'd taken to her new life as a pirate with unrestrained glee, her curiosity as boundless as Luffy's appetite. She placed a glass in front of Naruto, her fingers brushing his, a small, casual touch that spoke volumes. "What's a seraphim?" she asked, looking at the Den Den Mushi with interest. "In some old stories, they're the highest order of angels. Beings of fire and light," Robin explained, her mind racing. "But given the context of Tartarus, it sounds like they're building a cage for gods. Or a weapon to kill them." Naruto looked from the snail to Robin, then to Yamato. The battle with Omoikane had been a brutal lesson. Their enemies weren't just strong, they were intelligent, and they adapted. That's Cr. Ichir's ability to nullify devil fruits and phase through Haki. It wasn't a natural power. It was engineered. "They got data from Wano," Naruto said, the conclusion hitting him with cold certainty. "From our fight, from Luffy's awakening, they're studying us, and they're building something specifically to counter us." He looked at Luffy, who had reeled in a small sea king and was now wrestling with it on the deck. To counter him, the clone shimmered and dispelled, its information delivered. The knowledge settled over the deck like a cold fog. Their victory in Wano hadn't been an ending, it had been an announcement. It had painted a colossal target on their backs. "So what do we do?" Frankie asked, having overheard. His usual boisterous energy was tempered with a grim seriousness. "We can't just sail into a navy trap. We could try to go around it," Nami suggested, looking at her charts. "But it would add weeks to our journey to the next log pose point." "Weeks we don't have," Zoro's voice cut in. He hadn't been sleeping. He'd been listening. He sat up, his hand resting on the hilt of Wado Ikimonji. "An enemy building a weapon to kill you doesn't give you time to prepare. You strike first." Luffy, having finally subdued the Sea King by tying it in a knot, bounded over. "What's going on? Are we fighting someone?" Naruto looked at his new captain, then at the determined faces of the crew. He had been a leader for years, and he knew a pivotal moment when he saw one. This wasn't a decision for one person to make. "The world government is building a weapon on a secret island," Naruto explained calmly. "It's designed to neutralize people like Luffy. And probably me. We can ignore it and hope it never finds us, or we can go there and destroy it before it's finished." Luffy didn't even hesitate. His expression, usually so carefree, became deadly serious. "They're trying to build something to hurt my friends." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of war. "Okay, we'll go break it." There was no debate. The decision was unanimous. The Straw Hat Pirates were not a crew that ran from a fight. "This can't be a full frontal assault like Onigashima," Naruto said, his mind already shifting into Hokage mode. He was a shinobi again. This was a Black Ops mission. This needs to be quiet. A surgical strike, infiltration, sabotage, exfiltration. Minimal engagement, maximum damage. Sounds like a job for the A-team. Sanji said with a grin, lighting a cigarette. "Who's on the away team?" Naruto's eyes scanned the crew. "Me. For stealth and sensory. I can feel out their patrols, their power sources." His gaze fell on Robin. "Robin. For decryption and intelligence. If there are labs, files, computers, she's our key." He then looked at Sanji. "Sanji, you're fast, quiet, and your observation haki is sharp. You can run silent interference." Lastly, his eyes met Yamato's. She was vibrating with anticipation, her hand gripping her kanabo. "And me," she said, not a request but a statement. "If things get loud, you'll need a hammer." Naruto nodded. "Exactly. We're the ghost and the hammer. The 4 of us go in. The rest of the crew provides support from the Sunny, ready for a fast getaway. We find this Seraphim Omega, we destroy its power source, and we disappear." Luffy grinned. "All right, sounds like a plan. Don't get caught." The course was set. The Thousand Sunny, a vessel of dreams, turned its lion-headed prow toward Tartarus Base, a place where nightmares were being forged. Tartarus Base was a scar on the ocean. The island was a barren rock of black, volcanic glass, perpetually shrouded in a sickly green fog. A single, monolithic structure of gray steel and concrete rose from its center, a brutalist fortress with no windows, only sensor arrays and weapon emplacements. It hummed with a low, oppressive energy that made the hairs on Naruto's arms stand up. Under the cover of a moonless night, a small, shark-shaped submersible surfaced 100 yards from the shore. Frankie had outdone himself. The shark submerged 3 was silent and coated in radar-absorbent paint. "Okay, team," Frankie's voice crackled over the small comms unit. "I'm reading heavy energy signatures from the center of that building. Power conduits run all along the outer walls. The whole place is a fortress. Be careful." "Got it," Naruto whispered back. The 4 of them, Naruto in his classic stealth gear, a darker version of his jacket, Robin in a practical black catsuit, Sanji in a sleek raid suit from Germa, and Yamato, looking slightly out of place but no less dead. Lee in her dark-colored robes, stood on the black, glassy beach. "The fog will help with visual cover," Naruto murmured, his sage mode already active, the orange pigment around his eyes a stark contrast to the gloom. "But their sensors are advanced. They're using some kind of vibration detection. We move on my signal. Stick to the shadows I point out." He moved first, a ghost in the night. His footsteps made no sound on the glass-like rock. He led them on a weaving, serpentine path, skirting the edges of sensor sweeps he could feel as faint pressures in the air. Sanji, using his suit's thrusters for silent, controlled hops, kept pace easily. Robin, sprouting eyes and ears on distant surfaces, was their remote scout. Yamato, despite her size and power, moved with a surprising grace, placing her feet exactly where Naruto had. Her sheer power held in a state of coiled readiness. They reached the base of the fortress wall. It was a sheer, 100-foot cliff of seamless steel. "No handholds," Sanji observed. "Don't need them," Naruto said. He placed a hand on the wall, channeling a minuscule amount of chakra to it. He then turned and began to walk straight up the vertical surface, as easily as if it were flat ground. Yamato's eyes went wide with amazement. "Incredible." Naruto reached the top and lowered a ninja wire. Sanji took one look at it, then at Robin. "Robin-Kwan, allow me." He swept her into his arms and, with a powerful leap assisted by his thrusters, cleared the wall in a single bound, landing silently beside Naruto. Yamato grinned. "Show off." She grabbed the wire and, with her immense physical strength, scaled the wall in seconds. They were on the roof. It was a maze of vents, antennae, and patrol routes. Naruto held up a hand, and they all froze. He could feel 3 patrols converging on their position. "Genjutsu," he whispered. He formed a simple hand seal. For a moment, his eyes seemed to glow, a faint ripple passing through the air. The approaching marine patrols suddenly stopped. They looked around, confused, then at each other. One of them pointed in the opposite direction. "Hey, did you hear that?" They had been convinced a noise had come from the far side of the roof. As they moved to investigate, the team slipped past them, melting into the shadows. They found a maintenance hatch, and Robin's skills came to the forefront. She sprouted a dozen tiny hands, her fingers moving with impossible dexterity, manipulating the tumblers of the complex electronic lock. It clicked open. The inside of the fortress was cold, sterile, and silent. White corridors stretched out under the hum of fluorescent lights. "Power source is that way," Naruto murmured, pointing down a long hallway. "It's deep, underground." They moved like wraiths through the facility. Thanks to Naruto's senses and Robin's ability to read schematics she glimpsed on computer terminals, they avoided patrols and automated defenses with ease. It was in one of the labs that they found the first hint of the true horror of this place. The lab was filled with giant fluid-filled tubes. Floating inside them were creatures. They looked like the pacifistas they had seen before, copies of Bartholomew Kuma. But they were different. One had the wings of a Lunarian. Another had the telltale green hair of a certain swordsman. A third had a ridiculously curled eyebrow. "They're cloning them," Sanji breathed, his face a mask of cold fury as he looked at the clone that shared his father's features. "They're trying to replicate the Straw Hats." But that wasn't the worst of it. In the center of the lab, on a large operating table, was the inert, obsidian doll that Brook and the Naruto clone had captured in Wano. Wires and sensors were attached to it, running to a massive computer. "They're not just cloning bodies," Robin whispered, her face pale as she read the data scrolling on the screen. They're trying to synthesize souls. They're analyzing the data from that thing to create a weapon that can attack a person's will. A weapon that can negate Haki at its source. Seraphim Omega, Naruto said, the pieces clicking into place. It's not a single weapon. It's an anti-Haki field. An energy pulse that forces a person's spirit into submission. They plan to broadcast it, neutralize every Haki user on an island in one shot. They could end the entire age of pirates with something like that, Yamato said. Her hand tightening on her club. They must be stopped, a new voice said. The team spun around. Standing in the doorway of the lab was a man in a pristine white vice admiral's uniform. He was tall, with short cropped gray hair and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. His eyes were the color of cold steel, and they held no fanaticism, only a weary, absolute certainty. This was Vice Admiral Ryokan, the Justice Hound, commander of Tartarus Base. He wasn't flanked by guards. He was alone. I must admit, Uzumaki Naruto, Ryokan said, his voice a calm baritone. Your infiltration skills are even more impressive than the reports suggested. To bypass my entire security grid without tripping a single alarm, you truly are a ghost. Naruto stepped in front of the others. You knew we were coming. I hoped you would, Ryokan replied, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. Fighting you out here, in the controlled environment of my base, is infinitely preferable to hunting you across the chaotic seas. Here, I can limit the collateral damage. He began to walk slowly into the lab. I have read the reports. On you, on your captain, beings of godlike power, appearing from nowhere, toppling world orders. You call yourselves liberators, but all I see is chaos. You are no different from the Yonko you depose. You are just Onyo, fair storm that destroys everything in its path. We fight for our friends, Yamato growled. We fight for freedom. Freedom is the cry of every pirate, every revolutionary, every tyrant who has ever set fire to the world. Ryokan countered, his gaze never leaving Naruto. The celestial dragons are corrupt. The Yonko are monsters. And you are an unknown variable that threatens to shatter what little stability this world has left. My justice is not about good or evil. It is about order. It is about protecting the billions of innocent lives that are trampled under the feet of great men like you and your captain. This was no madman. This was a true believer. An antagonist who saw himself as the hero. You're protecting a system that enslaves people, Naruto said, his voice low. That erases history. That calls men like Jinbei monsters just for being born. That's not order. That's a cage. A necessary cage, Ryokan said without flinching. And you, Uzumaki, are a key that Thr. Edens to unlock it and unleash beasts upon the world. I will not allow it. The air crackled. Ryokan's body was suddenly coated in a dense, powerful layer of armament Haki, so refined it looked like polished black steel. He wasn't just a commander. He was a monster in his own right, one of the Navy's strongest. Yamato, Robin, Sanji, Naruto said, not taking his eyes off the Vice Admiral. Go. Find the power core. Destroy it. I'll handle this. Naruto, we fight together. Yamato protested. This is my fight, Naruto insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument. He wants me. This is a battle of wills. Go. That's an order. Sanji hesitated, then grabbed Yamato's arm. He's right. We have a mission. Let the Hokage do his work. With a last, worried look, the three of them vanished, heading deeper into the base. Now, it was just the two of them, the shinobi and the soldier, in a room filled with the ghosts of future wars. Sending your friends away, noble, Ryokan commented, but foolish. They trust me to do my job. Naruto said. He didn't enter a chakra mode. He just stood there, his sage mode senses drinking in every detail about his opponent. This man's Haki was dense, powerful, stronger than the calamities, almost on par with Kaido's, but more focused, more controlled. Ryokan moved first. He was impossibly fast, his Haki-coated fist aiming for Naruto's heart. Naruto met the blow with his own. His arm hastily coated in the same raw, crackling armament Haki he had manifested in Wano. The impact shook the room. The glass tubes containing the clones shattered, spilling fluid and lifeless bodies across the floor. Naruto was sent skidding back, his arm numb. Ryokan's haki was more refined, more potent. A direct slugfest was a losing battle. Naruto changed tactics. He became a blur, a whirlwind of motion. He used the lab as his playground, leaping off walls, sliding under tables, throwing lab equipment as distractions. He was speed, misdirection, and guerrilla. Tactics against Ryokan's overwhelming force. You fight like a coward, hiding in the shadows. Ryokan roared, smashing through a solid steel table that Naruto had thrown at him. I fight like a shinobi, Naruto retorted, appearing behind him and aiming a precise knife hand strike at the Vice Admiral's neck. Ryokan's observation haki flared, and he spun, catching Naruto's wrist in an iron grip. Not good enough, Ryokan grunted, and slammed Naruto into the opposite wall, the concrete cracking under the impact. Naruto coughed, pain flaring in his back. He needed to even the odds. He created a dozen shadow clones, which immediately swarmed Ryokan. The Vice Admiral became a force of destruction, his haki-coated fists shattering clones with every blow, but they served their purpose. They gave the real Naruto the space he needed. Naruto entered his Kurama chakra mode, the golden cloak flaring to life. He formed a Rasenshuriken, the shriek of the wind-based jutsu filling the lab. He hurled it. Ryokan, seeing the destructive power of the attack, didn't try to block it. He held up his hand, and the air in front of him seemed to warp. The Rasenshuriken hit the distortion and simply imploded. The shriek was cut short. The attack neutralized without a sound. An impressive technique, Ryokan said, lowering his hand. But your chakra is just another form of energy. And any energy can be nullified. He was using an advanced form of armament haki, creating a defensive field that could break down the composition of energy-based attacks. Naruto stared in shock. This man was the perfect counter to his entire arsenal. Meanwhile, Sanji, Robin, and Yamato were sprinting through the lower levels of the base. They burst into a cavernous chamber, the source of the immense power Naruto had sensed. In the center of the room, suspended in a crackling magnetic field, was a glowing, crystalline object. It pulsed with a sickly, familiar light. It was a shard, 10 feet long, of the Sa-Mi material the Otsutsuki heralds had been made of. It was a piece of Omoikane's body, salvaged by CP0 from Wano. This was the power source for Project Seraphim Omega. That's it, Robin shouted. That's what's powering the entire base. Then I'll smash it, Yamato yelled, raising her kanabo. Wait, Sanji called out. It's hooked up to the base's main reactor. If you just smash it, this whole island could go up like a bomb. We'd never make it out. As they debated, alarms blared. Steel shutters slammed down over the doorways. They were trapped. It seems your time is up, pirates, a voice said from a speaker. Ryokan. He was toying with them. In a dark conduit, hiding from a passing patrol, Naruto and Yamato were pressed close together. The air was thick with the hum of the facility and the scent of ozone. The heat from Naruto's body was a stark contrast to the cold metal around them. His breath hitched as a spike of pain from Ryokan's last blow flared in his side. You're hurt, Yamato whispered, her voice tight with worry. She was so close he could see the flecks of gold in her orange eyes. I'll live, he breathed, his gaze fixed on her lips. The danger, the adrenaline, the proximity, it was a potent combination. The concerns of the mission, of the enemy waiting for them, faded for a single, heartbeat-long moment. Naruto, she started, her voice barely audible. If we don't make it out of this, we'll make it. He cut her off, his voice soft but firm. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of white hair from her face. I promise. The certainty in his eyes was absolute. She searched his face, finding no trace of doubt. And in that moment, in the dark, cramped space, surrounded by enemies, she knew she loved him. Not for his strength, not because he was a prophesied hero, but because in a world that had only ever tried to break her, he was an immovable promise of protection. I love you, she whispered, the words so quiet they were almost lost in the hum of the conduit. His eyes widened slightly, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had come home. I know, he said softly, because he felt it too. A feeling so strong and clear it was like a second heartbeat in his chest. I love you, too. He leaned in to kiss her, but the clang of a nearby patrol broke the spell. The moment was over. They had a job to do. But the promise lingered in the air between them. Back in the main chamber, Naruto was on his knees, panting. Ryokan stood over him, unharmed. The Vice Admiral's fighting style was a perfect counter. Brute force was met with superior haki. Ninjutsu was negated. It was a strategic checkmate. "It's over, Uzumaki," Ryokan said, his voice holding a sliver of regret. "You fought well, but your chaotic power has no place in an ordered world. You think this is ordered?" Naruto gasped, pushing himself up. "You're using the power of the things you want to destroy. That crystal, that's Otsutsuki tech. You're playing with a fire that will burn you and everyone else." "A necessary evil," Ryokan stated. "We will control it. We will master it, unlike you." Naruto looked at the shard of the defeated enemy. Then at the man who thought he could control it. He thought of Orochimaru, of Danzo, of all the men who believed that any power was justified in the name of their own justice. They were always wrong. He had one last option. One he hadn't wanted to use. Not Fuinjutsu. Not a bigger Rasengan. Misdirection. "You're right," Naruto said, letting his golden cloak fade, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't beat you. Your haki, it's perfect." Ryokan paused, surprised by the sudden surrender. "You were wise to admit it. But you're wrong about one thing," Naruto said, looking up, his eyes clear and calm. "You think I'm the one you need to worry about." At that exact moment, in the power chamber, Robin, having analyzed the schematics, pointed to a single conduit. "There, Sanji. That's the primary coolant line. If you can rupture it." "On it, Robin Kwan." Sanji's leg burst into white-hot flame. Jue's shot. He kicked the conduit, his Germa-enhanced strength and heat buckling the metal. Simultaneously, Yamato acted. "I can't break the crystal, but I can freeze it," she yelled. Hallowed Glacier Slash. She unleashed a massive wave of absolute zero energy, not at the crystal, but at the coolant flowing from the ruptured pipe. The superheated coolant instantly flash froze, expanding and creating a catastrophic pressure backup in the entire system. In the lab, alarms shrieked. Red lights flashed. "Reactor overload imminent," a computerized voice announced. Ryokan's head snapped toward the sound. He had been so focused on Naruto, the primary threat, he had underestimated the rest of the infiltration team. A classic mistake. It was a diversion, Ryokan breathed, turning back to Naruto. "All of it." Naruto was now standing tall, a sly, foxy grin on his face. "You were so focused on the god, you forgot about the shinobi," he said. He pressed 2 fingers to the comms unit in his ear. Luffy. Now, on the ocean surface, Luffy, standing on the Sunny's head, had been waiting. "Okay. Gomu Gomu no, cannonball." He launched himself, a rubber cannonball of pure haki, rocketing toward the side of the fortress. The wall, already weakened by the internal explosions of the overloading reactor, shattered inward. Water from the ocean poured into the base. Ryokan stared at the chaos, his perfect, ordered world crumbling around him. He had lost. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought. He looked at Naruto, who was now running for the hole in the wall. "This isn't over, Uzumaki," he roared. "I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Naruto paused at the edge of the breach, looking back at the Vice Admiral, who was now trying to organize an evacuation. "Good luck with that," he said, and leapt out into the churning sea, where the shark submerge was already surfacing. They escaped with a small, inert fragment of the Otsutsuki crystal that Robin had managed to snag in the confusion. As the sub pulled away, they watched Tartarus Base collapse in on itself, a maelstrom of fire, steam, and seawater, a tomb for the world government's dark ambitions. They had won, but they had made a powerful, intelligent, and deeply personal new enemy. And they now held a piece of a puzzle that connected this world to the one Naruto had lost, a puzzle that a celestial god and a shadowy king were both desperate to solve. The race had begun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Garden of Forgotten Gods. The fragment of Otsutsuki technology sat on the table in the Sunny's library, a shard of solidified midnight that seemed to drink the light. It was inert, cold to the touch, yet it pulsed with a faint, residual energy that made Naruto's teeth ache. For days, they had sailed, following the new heading on the log pose, but their minds were fixed on this single, ominous artifact. Robin gently ran a gloved finger over its surface, her brow furrowed in concentration. The symbol, the 9-pointed swirl, was etched into its core. The patterns on this crystal, she murmured, comparing it to the rubbings from the Wano poneglyph and the one she'd found long ago on Skypia. They're not writing. They're star charts. But the constellations are all wrong. It's a map of a sky that isn't ours. A map home? Yamato asked, her voice hopeful as she stood behind Naruto, her hand resting on his shoulder. Naruto shook his head, his own sensory abilities telling him a different story. No, it's not a map, it's a key, or a tuning fork. He closed his eyes, focusing on the fragment's subtle vibrations. It resonated with something, a distant hum on the edge of his perception. It's calling to something, or someplace. It was the log pose that made the decision for them. The needle, which had been pointing steadily forward, began to spin wildly, no longer locking onto a single magnetic field. At the same time, the Otsutsuki fragment on the table began to glow with a soft, internal light, its low hum increasing in pitch. What's happening? Nami cried out from the helm, struggling to keep the ship steady as the very currents around them seemed to boil with confusion. The glow from the fragment projected a faint, shimmering line of light that shot out from the ship's bow, pointing not toward an island on the horizon, but toward a blank patch of sea. It's giving us a course, Naruto said, his eyes snapping open. It's synced with whatever is screwing with the log pose. Luffy, who had been watching the glowing crystal with childlike wonder, slammed his fist into his palm. A mystery ghost arrow pointing to a mystery island that doesn't exist. Adventure, he declared, full speed ahead. Quote, against her better judgment, Nami relented. There was no other choice. They sailed into the empty sea, guided only by the ethereal light of the alien artifact. For a full day they sailed, the sky turning a strange, bruised purple, the sea becoming as still and reflective as glass. A deep, profound silence fell, the kind that precedes a world-altering event. Then, they saw it. It rose from the sea without a ripple, as if it had been there all along, merely hidden behind a veil of perception. It was an island, but like no island they had ever seen. A single, colossal tree, its trunk miles wide and its branches scraping the clouds, dominated its center. The tree was impossibly ancient, its bark like petrified stone, and its leaves were a shimmering, silver gold. Waterfalls of pure, glowing energy cascaded from its upper branches, pooling into rivers that glowed with a soft, internal light. The island was not made of rock and soil, it was a living, breathing entity. The Otsutsuki fragment pulsed one last time and went dark, its purpose served. The thousand sunny drifted into a natural cove at the base of the giant tree, the air thick with the scent of ozone, damp earth. And something else, something ancient and powerful, like a library filled with forgotten gods. Where are we? Usopp whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. I don't think this place is on any map, Robin breathed, her archaeologist's soul alight with discovery. I think this place is from the Void Century. Or perhaps before it. Naruto stepped onto the shore, the ground soft and springy beneath his feet, like moss-covered memory. His sage mode was on fire. The natural energy here was overwhelming, pure and potent, 1,000 times denser than anywhere else in the world. It was like breathing pure life. He could feel the history of the place, not as thoughts, but as echoes in the energy. Echoes of a great civilization, of joy, of discovery, and of a profound, world-ending sorrow. There was a war here, he said, his voice distant. A long, long time ago. As the crew disembarked, the island seemed to welcome them. The glowing rivers pulsed in time with their heartbeats. Strange, gentle creatures made of woven light and leaves watched them from the branches of the great tree. The entire island was a sanctuary, a living library. They ventured deeper, drawn toward the base of the colossal tree. There, nestled amongst its giant roots, was a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single, weathered stone, similar to a poneglyph, but made of a darker, almost crystalline material. It was covered in the familiar ancient script, but also something more, intricate carvings depicting a story. Robin rushed forward, her hands hovering over the stone, her eyes devouring the text. This is the beginning, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her discovery. The carvings told a story that predated everything she knew. It showed a vibrant, flourishing planet. It showed the arrival of a being from the stars, a woman with pale skin, horns, and a third eye. An Otsutsuki, Kagaya. She came to plant a god tree, Naruto said, his own history suddenly crashing into this new world's. He recognized the depiction instantly. To drain the planet of its life force and grow a chakra fruit. Robin looked at him, shocked, then back at the stone. The carvings confirmed it, but then the story diverged from the one Naruto knew. It showed the planet itself fighting back. The collective will of every living thing, every animal, every plant, every person, rose up as a form of energy to resist the alien parasite. Haki, Jinbei breathed, looking at his own hands. The stone carvings showed figures wreathed in this energy. Their will so strong it became a physical force, an armor of the soul. Armament Haki. It showed others whose will was so powerful they could overwhelm the minds of lesser creatures, bending them to their command. Conqueror's Haki. Haki isn't just spiritual energy, Robin translated, her voice filled with awe. It's the planet's immune system. It's the life force of the world itself, weaponized by will. Rising up to fight an infection from the stars. The story continued. The god tree, unable to fully take root due to the planet's resistance, did something unexpected. To fight back against the world's will. It began to corrupt it, spawning twisted, chaotic manifestations of its own power, seeding them into the world's life cycle. The carvings showed people eating strange, spiraling fruits and gaining bizarre, unnatural powers. Devil fruits, Sanji said, the realization dawning on him. There, a side effect. A weapon the god tree created to fight Haki. The ultimate truth was laid bare before them. The central conflict of their world, Haki versus devil fruits, was not a clash of philosophies. It was the continuation of an ancient, cosmic war between a parasitic god and the defiant will of a living world. But the story wasn't over. The final carvings depicted a single, joyous figure, wreathed in an aura of pure freedom, his body as malleable as imagination. A figure who get in the face of the Otsutsuki goddess, his power not one of destruction, but of liberation. Nika, the sun god, the first awakened user, whose will was so perfectly in sync with the planet's desire for freedom that he could literally bend reality to his whim. Luffy stared at the carving of the ancient sun god, his own face reflected in the stone. He didn't understand the history, but he understood the feeling. The joy, the freedom. As Robin finished her translation, a shadow fell over the clearing. The air, once so vibrant and full of life, grew cold and still. The gentle light creatures in the trees vanished. The glowing rivers dimmed. The island itself seemed to hold its breath in terror. Naruto's head snapped up. He's here. A figure descended from the bruised purple sky, his presence. A vortex of absolute nothingness that warped the air around him. He was regal, with robes of pristine white and gold, his long, silver hair flowing as if underwater. His eyes held no malice, no anger, just the cold, detached certainty of a god come to pass judgment. On his forehead were 2 horns, and in his palms, he held 2 rinnegan, one in each hand. Floating behind him, like a halo of death, were a dozen truth-seeking orbs. This was Kagutsuchi Otsutsuki. So, Kagutsuchi's voice was not a sound, but a thought imprinted directly on their minds, a voice of crushing cosmic authority. The heretic has led me to the source of the infection. This world's primordial memory. How fitting that I should purify it here. His gaze swept over the straw hats, dismissing them as insignificant microbes. He looked at Luffy, whose gear 5th form had involuntarily manifested, a subconscious response to the divine threat. The chaotic variable, a flaw in reality's code. He looked at Yamato, the impure hybrid. Finally, his cold, ancient eyes settled on Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, you have violated the highest law of the clan. You have allowed your divine genetic material to merge with the filth of a lesser world. You have become the ultimate heresy. Your existence is an insult to our perfection. The pressure was immense, 1,000 times greater than Omoikane's. It felt like the weight of a dead star pressing down on them. Usopp and Nami collapsed, unable to even breathe. Sanji and Zoro were on one knee, their bodies screaming in protest. Only Luffy, Naruto, and Yamato remained standing. Their own godlike powers the only thing keeping them from being crushed by his sheer presence. "We beat your little errand boy," Luffy said, his usual grin replaced by a determined scowl. "We'll beat you, too." Kagutsuchi almost seemed amused. "You defeated a scalpel. I am the surgeon." He raised a hand. He didn't attack. He simply pointed at a section of the ancient forest a mile away. One of his truth-seeking orbs shot forward and touched a tree. The tree, and the quarter-mile of forest around it, did not burn, or explode, or freeze. It simply ceased to exist. It was erased from reality, leaving a perfect, spherical void of absolute nothingness. The sheer, casual totality of the act was more terrifying than any explosion. This was not a fighter. This was a force of nature, a living embodiment of entropy. The Straw Hat's attacks were immediate and desperate. Zoro launched his strongest slash, a hockey-infused wave of cutting energy. Sanji's leg burst into an even hotter, blue-tinged flame. Frankie unleashed a full-power radical beam. All of it flew toward Kagutsuchi. He didn't move. The attack struck an invisible barrier a foot in front of him and dissipated into harmless motes of light. "Your will is finite," his voice echoed in their minds. "My power is absolute." The battle that followed was not a battle. It was a lesson in futility. Every attack was negated. Every strategy was useless. Kagutsuchi moved with an unhurried grace, his truth-seeking orbs acting as a perfect, impenetrable defense and an unstoppable offense. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was dissecting them, analyzing their abilities with cold, scientific curiosity. He waved a hand, and Sanji's flames were extinguished. He pointed a finger, and Zoro's swords were encased in a gravitational field so intense he could barely lift them. He was turning their own strengths against them, deconstructing them with casual ease. He seemed to grow bored of the lesser Straw Hats. His attention turned to the real threats. He looked at Yamato, his eyes filled with a unique disgust. A hybrid creature, born of a dragon and an Oni, host to the spirit of a wolf deity, he intoned. "You are a symphony of impurity. You will be the first to be silenced." Quote. He raised a hand, and a black receiver rod, larger and more menacing than any Omoikane had used, formed in his grasp. He moved to strike her down, to erase her from existence. In that moment, something broke inside Naruto. He saw Kagutsuchi moving to harm Yamato, and the entire world narrowed to that single, intolerable act. All his power, all his history, all his loss and all his love, coalesced into a single, roaring point of absolute defiance. His grief for his lost home, his ferocious love for his new one, his bond with Kurama, his inheritance from the sage, his promise to Yamato, it all came together. He didn't just activate his power. He became it. A roar, not from his mouth, but from his very soul, echoed across the island. A colossal wave of golden-orange energy erupted from him. A tsunami of pure, unadulterated chakra. It was not just a cloak. It was a construct. A head, massive and fox-like, with burning red eyes and teeth like mountains, formed in the air above him. Then a torso, then 9 thrashing tails, each one a weapon of mass destruction. A perfect, titanic avatar of the 9-tailed fox, Kurama, materialized around Naruto, who stood at its center like a pilot in the heart of a god. But it was different. This was not just chakra. As the avatar formed, the very air around it crackled with black and red lightning. The island's immense natural energy, its planetary haki, was being drawn into the construct, not by force, but by resonance. Naruto's will to protect, his absolute refusal to let Yamato be harmed, was so powerful, so pure, that it had synced with the planet's own will to survive. The Kurama avatar, a being of pure chakra, was now sheathed in a shimmering, crackling coat of pure conqueror's haki. It was a perfect, impossible fusion. The ultimate power of his world, combined with the ultimate power of this one. A true sage of two worlds. The Kurama avatar's head turned, and its burning red eyes, now crackling with haki, locked onto Kagutsuchi. For the first time, a flicker of genuine shock crossed the Otsutsuki's face. Impossible. To merge chakra with the planetary will, the heresy is complete. Get your hands off her. Naruto's voice boomed, amplified 1,000-fold by the avatar, a sound that was both human and beast, a roar of pure, protective rage. The golden, haki-wreathed fist of the Kurama avatar, a fist the size of a battleship, swung. It wasn't just a punch, it was a statement. A declaration that this world, these people, were under his protection. Kagutsuchi brought all 12 of his truth-seeking orbs together to form a single, massive black shield. The fist of combined chakra and haki met the shield of absolute void. The impact did not make a sound. It was a silent, world-wreaking collision of ultimate creation and ultimate negation. The entire island shuddered. The great tree groaned. The very fabric of space around the point of impact warped and tore. The haki-infused chakra wasn't erased. The will behind it was too strong. It met the nullification of the truth-seeking orbs and fought it to a standstill. Naruto, inside the construct, poured everything he had into the blow. His love for Yamato was the fuel. His duty as Hokage was the structure. His promise to protect his new friends was the unbending will. Cracks appeared on Kagutsuchi's black shield. The god's eyes widened in disbelief. His absolute defense was failing. But Naruto knew he couldn't win. Not like this. A direct assault would only lead to a stalemate, and he couldn't maintain this form forever. He needed a cage, not a hammer. He needed a seal. Luffy, Robin, everyone, I need a diversion. Now, he yelled, his voice echoing in their minds through the sheer force of his will. His crew, shaken from their stupor by the sheer spectacle of the battle, acted instantly. Luffy, in gear 5th, turned the very ground beneath Kagutsuchi into a trampoline, bouncing the god around and disrupting his concentration. Zoro and Sanji unleashed a combined attack, a flaming dragon of swords and kicks. Frankie, Brook, and Usopp provided a constant barrage of suppressive fire. It was just the opening Naruto needed. While the Kurama avatar held Kagutsuchi's attention, Naruto himself, inside its chest, flew through a series of complex hand seals. He was preparing the strongest seal he knew, a modified version of the one used to seal Kaguya herself. But it needed a catalyst. It needed an anchor point infused with the planet's will. The stone, he roared. Robin, direct him to the stone. Robin understood. She used her devil fruit to create a giant, distracting illusion of the ancient carving, drawing Kagutsuchi's attention toward the clearing with the memory stone. As Kagutsuchi was forced back toward the clearing, Naruto finished his preparations. The Kurama avatar opened its mouth and began to gather a colossal amount of energy, a mix of positive and negative chakra, senjutsu, and raw haki. A tailed beast bomb, unlike any ever seen before. But he didn't fire it. Instead, the avatar's 9 tails snaked out, slamming into the ground around the clearing, each one glowing with complex fuinjutsu arrays. They weren't attacking. They were drawing a massive sealing formula on the ground, with the ancient memory stone as its epicenter. What are you doing? Kagutsuchi's voice echoed, a hint of desperation in it for the first time. I told you I've fought gods before, Naruto's voice boomed back. The trick isn't killing them. It's reminding them that they're mortal. With a final, deafening roar, the avatar didn't shoot the tailed beast bomb. It swallowed it. The construct absorbed its own ultimate attack, converting the raw power into the fuel for the ultimate seal. Rakudo, Shibaku Tensai, Fuin. 6 paths. Planetary devastation. Seal. The ground erupted, not in an explosion, but an implosion. The sealing formula flared to life, and the memory stone acted as a supercharged gravity well. The earth, the trees, the very bedrock of the island rose up, drawn toward Kagutsuchi. The Otsutsuki god struggled, attempting to teleport away, but the gravity of the seal, anchored by the planet's own will, was too strong. He was trapped. Rocks and earth swirled around him, encasing him in a prison of his own making. Within seconds, a new, massive sphere of rock and earth, a miniature moon, floated high in the sky above the island, humming with a terrifying, contained power. Kagutsuchi Otsutsuki was sealed. Silence. The Kurama avatar faded, leaving Naruto to collapse onto the ground, utterly drained. His body screaming from the exertion. Yamato was the first one to his side, catching him before he hit the ground. The crew stared at the new moon in the sky, then at the exhausted blonde shinobi. Their minds struggling to process the scale of what had just happened. They had just watched a man create a celestial body to imprison a god. But their relief was short-lived. As the dust settled, a new sound reached them. The rhythmic churn of hundreds of engines. The horizon, which had been empty moments before, was now black with ships. An entire fleet, led by 5 massive, imposing flagships, was bearing down on their island. The world government had arrived. On the deck of the central flagship, the 5 Gorosei stood, their ancient faces grim. One of them held a strange, telescope-like device, aimed not at the Straw Hats, but at the newly formed moon in the sky. "The weapon is armed," the sword-wielding elder said, on Amu-sama's command. From the depths of the ship, a cold, inhuman voice gave the order. "Fire! Crack the shell! Extract the prize!" A colossal cannon, powered by an energy that was neither scientific nor hockey, rose from the deck of the flagship. It aimed at the floating prison and fired a beam of pure, annihilating darkness. They weren't trying to destroy the moon. They were trying to perform surgery. The beam struck the seal, and cracks of furious red energy spread across its surface. The prison was failing. The enraged roar of a partially freed, and now utterly furious, Otsutsuki god echoed from within. The Straw Hats stared in horror. They had just escaped one apocalypse, only to be thrown headfirst into another. Trapped between a furious, awakening god and the full might of the world government, their greatest battle had just begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Promise of the Horizon. The sky itself screamed. The beam of concentrated darkness from the world government's superweapon did not just strike the floating prison, it poisoned it. The perfect seal Naruto had woven began to unravel, red, angry light bleeding from fissures that spread across the satellite's surface like veins. From within the cracking moon, Kagutsuki High's roar was no longer one of a detached god, but the raw, incandescent fury of a caged beast. "They're breaking the seal," Naruto yelled, forcing himself to his feet with Yamato's support. His chakra reserves were a barren wasteland. But his mind, the mind of a Hokage, was already calculating, assessing the impossible situation. "Their arrogance is astounding," Robin said, her face a pale mask of disbelief. "To think they could control such a being. They've doomed us all." The situation devolved into a nightmare trifecta. Before them, the full might of the world government fleet, 800 R ships forming an iron curtain on the sea. Above them, a celestial prison cracking open to unleash a vengeful god. And behind them, a crew on the verge of total exhaustion. The lead Gorosei, the tall one with the sword, pointed his blade at the small island. "Capture the Straw Hats. Secure Uzumaki Naruto. Eliminate all other witnesses." The fleet's cannons roared to life, 1,000 explosions of fire and steel hurtling toward the ancient island. It was a volley meant to obliterate, to cleanse the board of all pieces save the ones they wanted. Mirror Mountain. Yamato slammed her kanabo down, her own energy reserves running on fumes, and threw up a desperate wall of ice. It was a heroic but futile gesture. Her wall might stop a dozen cannonballs, but not 1,000. But the volley never hit. From the horizon, a new fleet appeared, a chaotic, motley collection of ships sailing under a myriad of bizarre flags. A beautiful pirate ship with a massive figurehead of a rooster. A flotilla of longships crewed by giants. A vessel that looked more like a floating fortress. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet had arrived. "We heard the captain was in a pinch." A voice boomed from the lead ship. Cavendish, in his full princely regalia, stood at the prow, his sword drawn. "We came as soon as we could." Bartolomeo's ship cut in front of the Sunny, his arms crossed as he generated a massive, transparent barrier. Barrier bulls. The cannonballs slammed into his indestructible shield, exploding harmlessly. No one lays a finger on Luffy Senpai and his crew. The giants of Elbaf roared a challenge, their colossal ships acting as shields for the smaller vessels. The sea erupted into total war. The disciplined, orderly lines of the Navy fleet were broken by the sheer, chaotic charge of the Grand Fleet. It was the opening they needed. "Yamato." Naruto's voice cut through the din of battle, sharp and commanding. He was no longer just a crewmate, he was a general on the field. "You're with me. We're taking command of the left flank. Your ice can block their cannons and give our allies cover." Yamato stared at him, then a fierce grin split her face. He wasn't coddling her or protecting her. He was giving her a command, a responsibility. He was treating her like the powerhouse she was. She roared, her spirit reignited. Naruto created 5 shadow clones, the last he could manage. "Zoro, Sanji," he yelled across the deck. "The 5 old men on that central ship are the real threat. The clones will run interference, but you two are the only ones who can take them down. Zoro's one eye gleamed with savage joy. Been waiting for a real warm-up. He tied his bandana around his head. Leave it to us, you damn moss head. Sanji retorted, his leg already bursting into Ifrit Hombi's electric blue flame. The two rivals shot off the deck like cannonballs, a green and blue comet aimed at the heart of the enemy command. Luffy. Naruto turned to his captain, who was watching the battle with a terrifyingly calm intensity. The seal is failing. We can't let Kagutsuchi get free. But that big ship, I can feel it. The one who gave the order is on it. The real king. Luffy's gaze fixed on the flagship. His body began to emit puffs of white steam. The drums of liberation started their beat. The one who won't let people be free, he said, his voice a low growl. He understood. I'll try to reinforce the seal, Naruto said. Buy as much time as you can. You and me, we take down the gods. The one in the sky, and the one on the throne. A shared look of absolute understanding passed between them. The god of freedom and the sage of will. Luffy launched himself into the air, a white meteor of joyous rage. Naruto and Yamato leapt onto a floating chunk of ice, propelled by her powers toward the raging naval battle. The final act had begun. The battle was a clash of titans. Zoro and Sanji, aided by Naruto's clones, engaged the five elders on the deck of their flagship. It was a fight unlike any they had ever had. The Gorosei were not just decrepit old men. They were monsters, each one possessing a strange, awakened devil fruit of their own, their forms shifting into nightmarish beasts of myth. It was a desperate, brutal struggle of the new generation against the ancient, hidden power of the old world. On the sea, Yamato was a force of nature. She skated across the waves on paths of ice, her canoe sending shockwaves that capsized marine vessels. She was a one-woman fleet, her roars of Reime Hake, punctuated by the crackle of her haki and the cheers of the pirates she fought alongside. She wasn't Odin. She was Yamato, the demon princess of the sea, and her leadership was born of pure, untamed strength and a desire to protect her new family. High above, the battle for the heavens was joined. Luffy, in his full gear fifth glory, slammed into the half-reformed Kagutsuchi as he began to break free from his prison. The Otsutsuki was weakened, his power fractured by the broken seal. But his rage was absolute. Insolent flea. Kagutsuchi's mental voice shrieked. You are the source of this chaos. I will erase your very concept from this reality. Their fight was a surreal spectacle. Kagutsuchi hurled spheres of void that erased chunks of the floating debris. Luffy, laughing manically, grabbed the voids themselves, stretching them into rubbery sheets and flinging them back. He turned Kagutsuchi's own truth-seeking orbs into bouncing balls, playing a deadly game of cosmic paddleball. It was the ultimate clash. Absolute order versus absolute freedom. Logic versus imagination. Below, Naruto stood on the highest point of the island, the great tree itself. His hands were pressed against its ancient bark. He wasn't fighting. He was focusing. He couldn't create another seal of that magnitude. But he could do something else. He poured the last vestiges of his own chakra, and the natural energy of the island itself, into the crumbling moon, not to imprison Kagutsuchi, but to speak to him. It was a desperate, insane gamble. A jutsu he had never attempted on this scale. A planetary-level mind link. He was going to attack the god not with power, but with philosophy. Shintention no Jutsu. Rengo. Mind-body switch technique. Alliance. He wasn't taking over Kagutsuchi's body. He was opening a bridge. A psychic channel between himself, Luffy, every member of the Straw Hats. Every soul in the Grand Fleet, every liberated citizen of Wano, and the cold, sterile mind of the Otsutsuki god. Kagutsuchi, in the midst of his battle with Luffy, suddenly staggered. His mind, an immaculate palace of cold logic and ancient knowledge, was breached. And a flood came pouring in. It was not a flood of pain or anger. It was a flood of life. He felt the burning passion in Sanji's kicks. Fueled by his desperate need to feed and protect. He tasted the exquisite, complex flavor of the all-blue, a dream-given form. He felt the weight of Zoro's ambition, the bond between a man and his swords. The promise made to a fallen friend that drove him to become the world's greatest. He experienced the terror and courage of Usopp, the feeling of being the weakest man in a crew of monsters. And still finding the strength to stand up and fight. He felt Nami's grief for her mother, her burning desire to map the world, to understand it, to make it hers. He felt the joy of a perfectly drawn line, the thrill of navigating a storm. He felt Robin's quiet solitude, the pain of a lifetime on the run, and the profound, earth-shattering relief of finding a place to belong. A family that would declare war on the world for her. He felt the exuberant, thrumming soul of Brooke, a man who had died and lived again, who found joy in a simple song, in a bad joke, in the rustle of a woman's panties. He felt the steadfast honor of Jinbei, the quiet strength of a man caught between two worlds, bearing the weight of his people's hopes. He felt the wild, desperate cry for freedom in Yamato's heart. The pain of her father's chains, and the soaring, unadulterated love she felt for the man who had shown her who she truly was. And finally, he was flooded with Naruto and Luffy. He experienced Naruto's entire life in a nanosecond. The crushing loneliness of being an orphan, the defiant grin in the face of a scornful village, the taste of Ichiraku ramen, the pain of Jiraiya's death, the weight of the Hokage hat. The fierce, all-consuming love for his family, both the one he was born to and the one he had found. He felt the agony of being torn from his world, and the quiet, defiant joy of finding a new one. And he felt Luffy, pure, simple, and absolute. The joy of meat, the love of adventure, the unbreakable, unshakable loyalty to his friends. A will so free it defied all logic. A dream so simple and so profound it could remake the world, to be the man with the most freedom on the seas. Kagutsuchi, the god of purity, of order, of sterile perfection, was drowning in a sea of messy, chaotic, beautiful emotion. He saw a billion moments of love, of friendship, of shared meals, of stupid jokes, of quiet promises, of drunken songs, of tearful goodbyes. The raw, unfiltered, and pure experience of life. His mind, his entire being, built on an ideology of perfection and control, could not process it. It was like feeding a supercomputer a paradox it could not solve. What is this? His mental voice whimpered, no longer a god's command but a child's cry. This feeling, this connection, it is illogical, imperfect, beautiful. The god of purity was broken by the power of emotion. At the same time, Luffy, seeing his chance, reared back his fist, now the size of Onigashima itself, imbued with the full, joyous power of the sun god. Below him, on the flagship, Amu, the shadowy king of the world, manifested its true form, a horrifying, amorphous creature of pure shadow and void, the antithesis of Luffy's light. There can only be one king. Luffy roared, his voice. See the laughter of a billion liberated souls. Gomu Gomu no, Dawn Rocket. He didn't just punch, he became the sun itself, a projectile of pure, unadulterated freedom, and slammed into Imu's form. The creature of shadow shrieked as it was consumed by the light, its power of control and authority utterly annihilated by the concept of absolute freedom. The empty throne's true master was dethroned, its dark heart erased by the dawn. With Imu's defeat, the Gorosei staggered, their monstrous forms flickering as their ultimate authority was severed. Zoro and Sanji, battered and bleeding, seized the opening, delivering the final devastating blows. High above, Kagutsuchi, his will shattered, his spirit overwhelmed, simply stopped fighting. His body, no longer held together by his divine will, began to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into particles of pure, golden life energy, which rained down on the island like a gentle shower, replenishing the life that had been sacrificed. His last thought, as his consciousness faded, was not of anger or defeat, but of a quiet, profound understanding. To live, is to be, impure. The war was over. The aftermath was quiet. The remaining Navy ships, their command structure shattered. Their god-emperor defeated, had surrendered or fled. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet, battered but triumphant, was celebrating, their cheers echoing across the now peaceful sea. On the ancient island, Naruto lay on the soft ground, utterly spent, the last of his energy gone. He had done it. He had saved this world, his new home. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Yamato. Her face streaked with dirt and tears, her smile the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She knelt beside him, gently brushing the hair from his forehead. "You were amazing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We were amazing," he corrected her, his own voice a hoarse rasp. She leaned down and kissed him, a kiss not of desperation or discovery, but of quiet, certain, everlasting love. It was a kiss that tasted like victory and the promise of a peaceful morning. His journey was over. He hadn't found a way back to his world. He had found a new one. A world he had fought for, bled for, and now. A world he would live for. Weeks later, the Thousand Sunny sailed on a calm, bright sea. The news was still filtering out. The fall of the world government. The rise of a revolutionary new era. The legends of the pirate crew who had toppled gods and kings. But on the deck of the Sunny, life went on. Luffy was fishing. Zoro was sleeping. Sanji was cooking. And at the prow of the ship, two figures stood side by side, their hands intertwined, watching the horizon. Naruto wore a new jacket, still orange and black, but custom-made by the tailors of Wano, more suited to a life at sea. His Hokage cloak was folded away in his cabin, a memory of a past life. Yamato wore her own adventuring clothes, the Neo Dasuki sash from her Odin days now tied around her waist as a belt. A reminder not of who she was pretending to be, but of the journey that had led her to who she was now. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the red horns that had once been a mark of her curse now just a part of the woman he loved. "Where are we going next?" she asked, her voice filled with a peaceful curiosity. Naruto looked out at the endless expanse of blue, at the horizon that held 1,000 more adventures. He felt the phantom weight of the Hokage hat on his head, and then the real, solid warmth of her hand in his. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, the 7th Hokage. He was Naruto of the Straw Hat Pirates. A shinobi of the sea. A man who had lost his home, only to find it again in the heart of an Oni princess. "I don't know," he said, a genuine, happy smile on his face. "But we're going there together." They stood there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the colors of a promise. They were sailing toward the last island. They were sailing toward the One Piece. They were sailing toward the dawn, and this time, they would meet it hand in hand. Chapter 7 End.